Test, test.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Noon.
I think we're pretty close, just looking at names. Any objections to proceeding? And we'll see, I know we're missing one or two. Just wait another moment. Okay, I have 201, so we'll go ahead and get started with calling to order and getting into roll call. So welcome to our second full meeting of the San Diego's Independent Redistricting Commission. Let me first turn to Andrew Potter, who is indeed joining us today. Thank you. For some key information about how today is going to work. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman Boehm. Happy to be here. I'll begin with a view of the virtual meeting protocol. It is important that you keep your microphone on mute until it is your turn to speak. You may also wish to use the raised hand feature located on the bottom right side of your Zoom screen to indicate that you wish to speak. If you're having any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, please send me an email and our office will be happy to assist. Additionally, before we begin, any members of the public who wish to provide oral testimony during today's meeting, please review the instructions posted on the redistricting webpage at www.sandiegocounty.gov/redistricting. Individuals that wish to speak must submit an online request to speak form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me just add as another introductory note that I've appreciated the relatively free flow of conversation and discussion we've had to date. For those, though, who want to request to speak without using the raise hand feature of Zoom, please feel free to raise your real hand, making sure your camera's on. I will do my best to recognize you. It's agreeable to everyone. Keep a running order and keep announcing that between turns. So we've got a rough idea of who's coming up next. I don't mean that to control the discussion or limit it in any way. And certainly if people want to have a free exchange or a follow-up question or two, I think we're all agreeable to that. But I'll try to keep that running order as we keep taking turns. And of course, ask your continued indulgence that if you do have follow-up questions, keep in mind there may be other people behind you. And especially on a day like today, we've got a robust agenda to get through. Does that all sound agreeable?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, item 2, is the roll call. Andrew, could you proceed?
Thank you. Before I call the roll, I would like to note for the record that all commissioners are participating via teleconference. As such, all votes will be handled by a roll call vote. I'll ask the commissioners to unmute your microphone and say either here or present, and I'll call you alphabetically by last name. We'll start with Chair Boehm.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Katarina.
Here.
Commissioner Chen. Commissioner Diaz.
Here.
Commissioner Dustal.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson. I'm going to ask you to unmute here.
Here.
Great. And Commissioner Inman.
Here.
Commissioner Kugliak.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Pons.
Here.
Commissioner Russ.
Here.
And Commissioner Servin.
Here.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Before we proceed further, I want to apologize to Commissioner Servin for the rest of us not adhering to the memo to wear Christmas lights today. But nonetheless, it looks great, Rams. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is non-agenda public communication speakers. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on subject matters within the commission's jurisdiction, but not an item on today's agenda. The only action the commission may take is a referral to staff. I do want to note for the record, the letter and 2 e-comments that were received and posted ahead of today's meeting. I also want to note that Barbara Jimenez, the county's executive lead for redistricting, will now be our lead contact person at the county with the commission fully formed. Andrew Potter had been serving in this role in the interim. And again, I'd like to thank him, and I'm sure on behalf of all of you offer our thanks for a job well done up to this point. Moving forward, Barbara will be our main point of contact. Andrew, along with Aaron and Nicole and Liberty and people I'm undoubtedly forgetting on the county staff, will continue to play important roles, particularly Andrew and Aaron in kind of a clerk and parliamentarian role, and we'll continue to see them at our meetings. We are, of course, grateful to the entire staff for their efforts to support the IRC in various ways and at various stages. Additionally, before we begin, I do want to note that any members of the public that wish to provide oral communication or testimony during today's meeting, please review the instructions posted on the redistricting webpage at www.sandiegocounty.gov/redistricting. Individuals that wish to speak must submit an online request form to speak. And again, we appreciate your indulgence as we work through these difficult times where we can't do this in person. Andrew, do we have any requests to speak under this agenda item? Muted.
Boy, my own mistake there. Thank you. We have 5 requests to speak under non-agenda public communication this afternoon. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to address the board, address the commission, and we'll be calling speakers by the last 4 digits of their phone number if they've called in, but it looks like all 5 speakers have joined the online session. And so we will go ahead and unmute each speaker individually. And each speaker will be asked to please state their name for the record. And we'll begin with the first request to speak, Janine Arakat.
Hi, good afternoon to the commission. I hope you all are doing well today. This is Janine Arakat calling in from PANA, the Partnership for Advancement of New Americans once again. I'm sure you all saw the letter that you received this morning. PANA, alongside 15 other organizations from across the county, sent to you on our suggestions and recommendations for next steps as you take on this important task that we hope that you take our letter into consideration. We can't stress enough the importance of you doing your work in an independent manner. The San Diego County Independent Redistricting Commission was created to allow community members to lead the redistricting process and to carry out a process that is independent of the influence of the Board of Supervisors. Again, you are not alone in this process. The state CRC and the city of San Diego also have independent commissions leading their redistricting process. We encourage you to reach out to current and former state and local commissioners, invite them to speak to you about what went well during their onboarding, training, and redistricting processes and what they would have done differently. We'd be happy to assist you with identifying state and local experts on engaging hard-to-reach communities, language accessibility, and disability access. Lastly, we encourage you to take on a shared leadership model, form subcommittees, and engage in team building over the next year. Thank you all for your time, and I look forward to this meeting.
Thank you very much. And next up, we have Cipriano Vargas.
Good afternoon. This is Cipriano Vargas. I am a resident of the city of Vista, and first of all, congratulations for being elected to serve in this role. I watched the meeting last time, and I know that there's a great wealth of knowledge in this virtual space. Today, I am speaking on behalf of SEIU 221. Nobody knows the county better than our county workers, which include social workers, librarians, nurses, and many others. Our coalition is here with recommendations that provide good government and encourages this commission to be active participants in this process. We encourage the commissioners to do a deep dive on best practices, get the training you need, and be transparent as you navigate the hiring of consultants and other staff. Our coalition sent a letter earlier this week, which you can review with more specifics on some of these recommendations. In 2017, I was actually active in the redistricting within the city of Vista. While there was no commission involved in that process, I highly encourage community participation and all commissioners to take an active role. 3 key areas that we believe in creating a strong infrastructure include, first and foremost, follow the leadership of the state CRC and having shared leadership. I encourage the commission to follow this and have a rotating chair and vice chair. I currently serve as our board president for a school district here in North County. And with that, know the importance of shared leadership and making sure that ideas are maximized and that we have different perspectives being brought to the table. Secondly, following the subcommittee structures, especially one dedicated to the Voting Rights Act to ensure compliance, and another one on the training that you will be required and you'll be needing. I know that Commissioner Sherburne mentioned outreaching to one of the state commissioners, and that is a great first step. We need to make sure that all commissioners have access to that. And lastly, making sure that team bonding is happening. As a collective, you work together when you have an understanding of the leadership styles, strengths, and better able to move forward. Thank you for your service. And as a coalition, we are here to bridge our community and be a helping hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Diana Aguirre.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon. And first I would like to, my name is Diana Aguirre, and I am a resident of the city of Carlsbad. I would like to welcome everyone and also congratulate you on this very important role in determining the redistricting. I just wanted to comment that I really hope that you take into consideration, now that the mapping deadline has been moved from August to December, to take this as an opportunity to think through training and to prepare to develop outreach plans and work with our community organizations. It's a very important role that you have. And again, I appreciate the work that you will be putting into the redistricting. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Lori Teal.
I'm Lori Thiel, President of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. I'm sorry, you're getting feedback?
We are.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm calling today representing the League of Women Voters of San Diego and our sister league in North County. I'd like to first thank you for the commission for serving with the San Diego board, and to remind you that the mapping has been moved from August 15th to December 15th, so that there's plenty of time to do your work. And I'd like to thank you and ask you to take advantage of that time.
Our next speaker, our last speaker is Jamila Mohammed.
Hi. Yes. Okay. Hello, my name is Jamila. I am with United Women of East Africa, or UW East. We signed on to the letter you received last night. UW East is an organization based in City Heights, providing health services, education, and advocacy for the well-being of East African community, women, and families. Congratulations for being selected to serve on San Diego County's first independent redistricting commission. Our organizations look forward to working with the commission to help maximize transparency, inform its outreach efforts, and engage the community in the historic process. Recent state legislation changed San Diego County's deadline to adopt maps from August 15 to December 15, giving the commission additional time to carry out its work. There is now ample time to think through trainings and preparations that are necessary to develop outreach plans in partnership with community organizations and reach out to other local independent redistricting commissions such as San Diego City and the state of California. Thank you for your service. We look forward to working with you in the upcoming year.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, that concludes the requests under non-agenda public comment this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you again to all our speakers and to all their inputs and all their efforts to make our community a better place. It's much appreciated. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the December 10th, 2020 regular meeting. Before I ask for a motion for approval, I just want to see if anybody needs a moment to review them further. Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Commissioner Larson makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second it.
Second by Commissioner Brown. Any discussion? Seeing none. Andrew, I think we can go ahead and call the roll for the vote.
All right, great, thank you. Commissioner Boehm,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Diaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Kugliak,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Pons,
Aye.
Commissioner Russ,
Aye.
and Commissioner Servin.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, that motion passes unanimously with all commissioners being present and voting aye.
Very good. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'll now proceed to item 5 on the agenda, entitled Overview of the Redistricting Budget. Let me add as an introductory note that this is an informational item, and we will go through the usual process, which is we'll have a presentation by Ms. Jimenez. We'll have an opportunity for the commissioners to ask clarification questions. Then we'll see if there are any requests from the public, and then we'll have a discussion. So with that, let me ask Barbara Jimenez to take the lead and tell us what we need to know about the overview of the budget.
Thank you, Chairman Boehm. Good afternoon, commissioners. So it's my pleasure to serve all of you as the county's point of contact along with this amazing team. And what that means is we'll be looking at how we can support you as it relates to the operational and administrative aspects of this important effort, including the finances. And of course, this is at the direction of the Independent Redistricting Commission. So today we are here to present an overview of the budget for the IRC. And as you may recall, the California Election Code requires the Board of Supervisors to provide for reasonable funding and staffing for the Independent Redistricting Commission. So I, along with several other key staff and members that you have met, have been assigned to support the IRC throughout the redistricting process. And additionally, funding for the IRC was established by our Board of Supervisors in October, along with the selection of the first 6 IRC commissioners. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you all to Nicole Temple, who's been assigned as one of our co-managers for redistricting, along with Liberty Donnelly. And just a quick note on Nicole, prior to this effort, she served as our financial policy and planning officer for the county's budget office. And she also served as the county redistricting project manager in 2011. So 10 years ago, she brings that expertise and knowledge to the table as well. So we're really excited to have her as part of the team. So she's going to go ahead and provide some additional information. Nicole? Nicole, you may be on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Apologies for that. Thank you, Barbara. It's my pleasure to be here and serve the commission. Once again, another exciting decade of redistricting is underway. So first I'll address funding and the budget for the commission. On October 13th of this year, as Barbara mentioned, the Board of Supervisors established county funds of $750,000 for the commission's work as a preliminary budget. Barbara has shared the materials from that board action with your commission. This was identified as a preliminary budget for 2 reasons. First, because redistricting is a project that occurs only once per decade, there are many unknowns. Needs, capabilities, and the environment evolve over 10 years, as do associated costs. The county's redistricting process has changed significantly from 10 years ago with the establishment of an independent commission. Secondly, at that time back in October, the full commission had not been formed. In setting a budget of $750,000, the Board of Supervisors recognized a level of uncertainty in costs and in the direction that may come from a fully seated commission. The amount of $750,000 was an estimate based on the county's cost for redistricting in 2011, accounting for inflation and other cost increases. Let's turn now to anticipated expenditures. At this time, the commission has not expended any of its funding, but we know there are expenditures to come. Amounts and specific cost estimates are being developed. Some of this will result from the competitive procurement process that will be discussed later on today's agenda. In general, the IRC budget is intended to fund the costs of contracted services, including legal representation and contracts for demographer and mapping services, outreach, and other services that may be needed. The translation of materials and meetings for public access, information technology to support the commission, including equipment, email, the website, and other needs, any education and training costs for commissioners and county IRC staff, any costs that may be associated with public hearings, such as room rental fees, and other services and supplies. An important note here is that the IRC's budget does not include the cost of county IRC staff time. This is paid by the county outside of the commission's budget. As Barbara mentioned, because these are county funds, the budget will be administered by county staff and me on behalf of the commission. The county is dedicated to responsible stewardship of public funds and maintaining fiscal stability in all we do. We will be developing more budgetary specifics as additional information about costs become available. County IRC staff will bring forward regular updates to the commission on the IRC's budget. And with that, I will turn back to Barbara.
Thank you, Nicole. So as mentioned, much of the information is still coming together. I'm really confident in the strong team who are managing the IRC funds on behalf of the commission. And Chairman Bain, that concludes our presentation on the budget. We're available for any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Barbara. Thank you, Nicole. And it is great to have somebody with experience on these matters, as well as the overall commitment, both of you two and the rest of the team. Let me ask now, are there any clarification questions from the commissioners for Barbara, Nicole, or others before we hear from the public speakers and have a later discussion? I see Commissioner Pons, Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Serban. Okay, we'll start with those three. Commissioner Pons, please.
Yes, thank you for that brief. The question is, do you anticipate, based on the 10 years since we've done this, what sort of additional costs do you think we'll incur above and beyond IT and some things like that? And this goes back to the issue of using lessons learned and best practices to sort of shape and influence what we're doing going forward. So from a budgetary standpoint, what do you anticipate the additional cost to be? In what form?
One of the main differences that we're seeing this year from 10 years ago is the way that we're structuring our contracts. So we anticipate that we're going to have additional costs for our demographer contract. The way that the county managed our redistricting software 10 years ago was paid differently. So we know that that's going to be an additional expense. We're also incurring the cost of a public outreach coordinator, which wasn't contemplated 10 years ago. That's something else that we'll be looking at. I also anticipate that the costs for translation are going to be more significant, that will be required to translate materials and meetings into additional languages than we did a decade ago.
And if I may add, I would think the other additional costs would be those on any trainings for the commissioners and the staff. Again, as we understand, there's a lot of trainings coming up and a lot of opportunity to learn more about it. So that could be an additional cost as well.
Great. Commissioner Pons, any follow-up?
No, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Inman.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, Nicole and Liberty were mentioned as people that were going to be supporting us. And my question is just, what's the time? Is this like, are you dedicated 100%, 50%? Just give me some notion of that, please. Thank you.
Either one of you want to take the lead on responding to that? Or Barbara?
Yeah, so Nicole is actually 100%.
Yes.
So up until, I know she's finalizing a couple of pending projects, but very minimally, but we are committed, so she is now 100%. Liberty and I are working still on some of the COVID-19 activities, but we also have added in Lizette Tapia and some additional team members to support this.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Inman, any follow-up on that?
And I did have another question, but no, that answered my initial question. And then about the website. Maybe we'll get to that in some other agenda topics, but is that something that we're going to hire a webmaster or something to manage, or who determines content, manages the website? And if this is something we'll talk about later, that's fine. So.
At this point in time, we have county staff managing web content. That's Liberty, Lizeth and her team mainly, but we're at the direction of the commission.
And Commissioner Inman and everyone, I'm confident we'll need to be talking about that a little bit as we get into the question of the outreach RFP and those proceedings. Commissioner Inman, that take care of it for now?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Serban.
Let me just make sure. Okay? Am I not muted, or can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So it sounds like my initial question was addressed, which is that the differences between this iteration of this process and the last iteration is very different. So the budgets, there might be different budget items which were identified. What I'm curious also about is, was there any analysis of maybe other similarly sized counties and what budgets they might have allocated for their commissions? Or I mean, can we anticipate our budget needs based on maybe other counties who have already done this in the past?
Nicole, I'll turn it over to you because I know for the board letter, we did some analysis. Would you like to cover that?
We did, we have done some comparisons and looked at other jurisdictions, and what we've determined is that it's very difficult to draw apples to apples comparisons because each of the jurisdictions operate so differently. Mainly what we looked at when we developed our $750,000 estimate was increases in inflation, as well as historical increases in the county's costs for professional services of the type of contracts that we were envisioning that the commission would intend to move forward. But knowing that there was a lot of uncertainties, and that the direction that may come from the commission when it was fully seated may be additional costs and activities and requirements that we weren't anticipating. So, we did talk with the city of San Diego and look at their budget, but the city, the numbers that they gave us, they were very clear that they were very, very understated, and that the budgetary numbers that they had planned for did not fully capture all of their costs. And the main thing that was not captured was the significant unanticipated costs that they had for translation. So we looked at, like I said, historical patterns, escalation, and then we added a reasonable amount that we felt for contingency. But this is subject to discussion of further considerations by the commission, should you so desire. But I will continue to come forward, particularly when we get to start expending funds and start developing a line on a budget, so that you have more detail.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up? Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a kind of a different question. But I think I read somewhere that it said that the funds weren't initially included in this year's budget. Is that, I guess I'm just curious, is that, I mean, it seems like the work of the IRC is an anticipated expense, and it was known that this would be happening. Why wasn't our budget included in this year's budget?
I think that just has to do with the board's budgetary timeline. At the time that the board adopted their budget, for fiscal year 2021. They weren't, we had little to no idea what the costs of redistricting were going to be. The county did have unanticipated fund balance that was used to support the fund, that was used to support the budget for the Redistricting Commission, and they knew that there would be a source of funding available for that, which is what happened.
Commissioner Serban, any follow-up or additional? Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Diaz, I'm sorry, let me just collect first. So Commissioner Diaz, Commissioner Chen, you wanted to?
Yes, please. I thought I raised my hand.
I'm sorry.
So two quick questions. One, what was spent in 2011? And two, if we find that we believe we're going to go over budget, what is the process, if there is one, to acquire more funding?
Refer back to my notes. We spent approximately $500,000, just a little under $494,184 for the 10-11 redistricting efforts. That doesn't include staff time, but that includes the expenditures that they planned in 2011 are not an exact comparison to what we're intending in 2020. As I mentioned, it's structured a little bit differently. We didn't have an independent commission. Yes. And apologies, the second part of your question, if you could repeat that for me.
If we believe we're going to go over budget or find us spending more than we thought.
If we need additional appropriations, we would need to make a request to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, thank you.
I think I had Commissioner Diaz next, but I didn't have anybody else just before I let her start. Commissioner Catarina, Commissioner Brown, you wanted to?
Well, Commissioner Chen just asked a question I was going to ask, so I'm fine.
Good. Any others? Good. So let me go to Commissioner Diaz, then Commissioner Catarina.
That was actually my question as well. But I also understand that staff, it says county staff is going to be making that request to the board. Is that correct? Because it should come directly from us, but I'm just trying to understand our role in actually soliciting that request and what that process.
Sure. So this is Barbara, Vice Chair Diaz. Similar to the initial board letter, if the IRC, the commission moved forward and indicated that we would need, you would need additional funds, the county role is to process the board letter and get it before the board for the approval. That would be our role, based on the feedback, the information, the request from the IRC.
Vice Chair Diaz, any follow-up or another question? Great.
No, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Catarina.
Hi, thanks. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful. I had a lot of questions, but many of them got answered. So thanks to my other commissioners. My question for you, Nicole, I basically have two questions right now, and I'll start with the first one. So I do know that we have had some legal expenses incurred, even though we haven't been billed. And I'm sorry if it's in the contract and I don't recall off the top of my head, but can you tell me a little bit about how we will be billed for legal expenses in the future? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? And how that will be reported to us, which is kind of more of a structural question.
So I will, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, but currently that agreement is being processed through the county council office under that contract. And if I missed anything, please let me know. Or if you have anything.
I understand it's an hourly billing. County council manages that contract, and they will inform me, and I will coordinate with them about expenditures, and I will include that in the budgetary updates for the commission.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, if you think this is appropriate, I'm very interested in the presentation that you made to the Board of Supervisors, and I was wondering if you could make that available to us, in the coming days, just so we have a baseline, if you will, of what you looked at and what we need to start considering as we move forward in this area.
Barbara's provided you with the materials that were sent to the board. There wasn't an additional presentation to them. It was just the document that was sent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Caterina, that's all? Good. Commissioner Inman?
Unfortunately, the longer it goes, the questions start to come up, I guess. So we talked about expenses. Now, do we have to approve payment of anything formally, or how do you authorize a payment, for example, to legal counsel? Do they submit a bill, and I mean, who approves the bill? Is it us or somebody else?
As I understand, that's managed by county staff.
So if I may add on that, I think the council, the legal counsel, a little bit different just because of how that's structured. And other anticipated expenditures that are on the overview that Nicole discussed, such as any of the contracting services, IT, all of that. Again, Nicole mentioned coming back to the IRC to indicate updates on the budget. And again, there would be discussions on what those costs are for the IRC. I think the piece that's more of a county staff is the process of actually based on the IRC approving our specific expenditures. For example, if we determine that education and training is necessary for the commissioners, and the commissioners have identified this is the training, and you've all agreed this is what we want to take, and then here's the cost, then the county staff are sort of the that's been approved by you all, we can now pay it. Another example would be the equipment. We're going to be giving you an update on the equipment. So equipment is being provided, and so then once that bill comes in, then this is what the equipment costs in it would be shared with you with those regular updates from regarding the budget. Does that answer the question, or did I muddy it up more?
No, I get the gist of it. The big picture will approve amounts, and once we approve the amounts, then you'll go pay and procure and all those kinds of things.
And this, we are beginning, if I just may add, so again, any direction that the commission gives us and determines, that's what we will follow. Since this is the beginning and we needed to get some things going, like being able to order the laptops, et cetera, that's the initial process. As Nicole mentioned, there has been no expenditures at this point. So whatever the direction is to set up, we will adhere to, of course.
I think I saw Commissioner Dostal, then Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, I did come up with a question.
Let's take Commissioner Dostal first. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question was just on the updates to the commission. Is that a monthly update on the budget?
Bingo.
I was envisioning monthly, but that's at the commission's direction.
Any follow-up on that? Good. Sorry, Commissioner Brown.
Well, that's what I get for being last, because that was my question, was what Commissioner Dostal just asked. So that's fine.
Good.
So we don't keep any accounting on our end. I guess it's all kept through county personnel.
One of our assignments is to administer the accounting and financials on your behalf. Yes.
Okay, good.
I saw Vice Chair Diaz and I think Commissioner Pons. Vice Chair
Yes.
Diaz.
I'm just going to entertain this as an idea, and maybe this could be for future discussion. But it almost makes sense to me that we should form some kind of subcommittee to review the budget and just, let the county staff carry out sort of the administrative end. But when it comes to discussions about, how those expenditures are going to be made, I think that's definitely something within our purview. Would that be something that the county, just to clarify, would that be something within our authority as the IRC?
That is my understanding, yes. So we serve if that is the direction that the commission would like to take in terms of forming a subcommittee, then yes.
And Vice Chair Diaz, I'll ask you to keep that thought in mind when we come back to general discussion on this, because I think we've talked about the word subcommittee before, but this might actually be a good time to discuss it. Before we do that, and before we turn to the public, let me just ask, and before I call on Commissioner Pons, any other commissioners wanting to ask a question or contribute to this part of the discussion? No, very good. So Commissioner Pons, and then we'll go to public comment.
My final question is about accountability, transparency, and the word audit. It sounds like we're going to be accountable for the expenditure of funds and approving, funding lines. Is there going to be an audit process to make sure that we maintain the confidence of the public that we are using those funds for the purposes intended? And how often would that audit be conducted?
I'm not aware that there's a formal audit process for the commission's budget, no.
If
Okay.
I may add, the transparency, I think Commissioner Ponzi asking about is by updating the public at these meetings monthly is one way in terms of that full transparency for the public in terms of expenditures approved, whichever process is put in place, and then where we are with the budget.
I understand. So that's part of the transparency piece, but I also think, and the issue of confidence would be sort of put in place through an audit process that leaves a trail of exactly what was spent and why it was spent and for what purposes. So I'm going to recommend at the end of this that we vote on, or maybe put forward a recommendation that there is an audit process put into this process, this whole budget process. Okay.
Thanks for that. We will add that to the discussion to follow in just a moment. Let me just ask one more time if there are any questions or requests for clarification. Seeing none, I'll ask Andrew if there are any requests from the public to speak on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are no requests to speak on this item.
Very good. All right. So I'd like to open the floor for discussion. If it's okay for everyone, I thought maybe we could start with the two issues that have already been specifically mentioned. Vice Chair Diaz's comment on subcommittees, and again, I know it's come up before, and then Commissioner Pons's comment about an audit or audit process. Let me just ask, Vice Chair Diaz, do you want to explain a little bit more about the subcommittee comment?
Yeah, definitely. So as part of our independent nature from, the way that we operate independently from the county, I think it's important that we have the public's confidence, and also that ties into the auditing of how these expenditures are made. And so that could be part of one of the responsibilities of the subcommittee. And I know that other commissions and other jurisdictions have already formed subcommittees. So that's sort of the basis of where my idea came from.
Thank you for that. Comments on that or contributions? Please, Commissioner Dostal.
I'm just wondering what this subcommittee is going to be doing. Are they going to be making a recommendation? Because as I understand it, the staff is going to come to the entire commission and tell us where we are in the budget. So what is the subcommittee going to be doing?
Vice Chair Diaz.
Well, that's a good question. I would look at, I just sort of, developed this idea just now as we're discussing, but I think that it's important. The county's already allotted an initial amount of money, and if there are additional expenses that also need to be made, we can deliberate publicly as a subcommittee and discuss what those additional expenses should be and how they should be spent. And so that gives the public a process, basically, of how this money is going to be spent, because it's all taxpayer dollars. So I think it's really important. And the county staff's role could be then to communicate what our recommendations are to the board. And so that's where I see the subcommittee kind of fitting into that process. Now, in terms of looking at what's already been spent or going to be spent with that $750,000, that's another point of discussion, I think, because I think that ties into Commissioner Pons's reference about an audit and how often the county is going to be, well, we know that they're going to be giving us the information on a monthly basis. But from our end, how do we make sure that that money was spent appropriately and that the public, it's a completely transparent process, basically. I mean, it's basically just about, transparency and also giving some sort of authority to the Independent Redistricting Commission to be able to guide this process of spending money, because we've got very important work ahead of us, a lot of technical expertise we're going to be relying on and finding the best possible quotes as well. And so I think that that's really important that we have some kind of budgetary committee. So
I'm going to tentatively ask Commissioner Dostal for a response if she's interested, then Commissioner Serban, then come back to Commissioner Pons to plug in any additional comments on the audit side. Commissioner Dostal, did you have anything you wanted to say in response to that?
No, thank you.
Okay, good. Commissioner Serban.
I think in response to the question of what the purpose of the committee would be, I think, since this body doesn't have a treasurer, so to speak, but we do have a budget, I think that subcommittee would function almost like as an executive treasurer, but through the process of a subcommittee. So, and I think the Commissioner Pons's suggestion of implementing an audit would be one of the matters that would be under consideration within the jurisdiction of consideration for that subcommittee, as well as just considering the expenditure of funds for other unanticipated expenses.
Good. Commissioner Pons, do you want to provide a little more thought about audit and that process?
Yes, the subcommittee doing an internal audit on ourselves. I mean, that's a distinction without a difference. And, it's very difficult for us to police ourselves, I think. I mean, it's a great idea, but for me, I was thinking about an independent external organization that comes in and say, look, the books are clean. I mean, we got integrity. We got great character. We're not going to squander the public's funds, but the public doesn't know that. And I think if you tell the public there was an external organization independent of the IRC that came in and audited the funds, then they would go, okay, it was outside of the IRC, so that gives them a level of confidence that maybe they wouldn't get if we said we self-policed ourselves. And so I like Commissioner Diaz's comment about the subcommittee. I loved it. I just think that audit process should be external to the IRC just to make sure it has the validation that it needs.
Thank you for that. I saw Commissioner Serban, then Vice Chair Diaz. Go ahead, Commissioner Serban.
Right. So I think the audit process is certainly something that would be more valuable if it were conducted by an independent third party, and our subcommittee, the role of the subcommittee would then be to consider and approve that independent third party who would conduct the audit.
Vice Chair Diaz.
I just want to agree with Commissioner Pons that yes, absolutely, 100% should be an independent audit. Yeah, I never, in no way did I intend to mean that the subcommittee itself would do the audit on ourselves. So thank you for clarifying, Commissioner Serban. That's what I meant.
I just had a break in my camera, but I think I saw Commissioner Krugliak and then Ms. Jimenez, unless Ms. Jimenez, is it directly relevant to that?
Yes, I'm thinking that what might be, the word audit may be what might be throwing at least the county team off, but I do want to note that all the expenditures that are approved by our Board of Supervisors and the county follow requirements and sign-off process. So there's internal processes established in terms of how that is approved and how that is paid for. So we're happy to bring that forward if that is helpful in any sense. I think that the word audit maybe was throwing us off a little bit, but Nicole is unable to approve anything on her own, nor am I. And so there's a complete process and protocols in place for any expenditures of the funds. And then of course we would be doing the monthly update. So that's already built into that system. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Kugliak, thanks for your patience. Please go ahead. Commissioner Kugliak, I think we still have a mute problem.
I was double muted. Is that better? Okay. So just procedurally, is the process then that potentially if we decided we wanted a third-party auditor, despite what Ms. Jimenez just told us, that we would add that under the contracted services for the competitive contracted services that we will ask to procure. And then for the budgetary subcommittee, I don't see it on today's agenda, but presumably based on PANA's letter and other recommendations, we're going to be having quite a few of them and finalizing what they are and who's on them, that we would consider a budgetary subcommittee when we go through that whole subcommittee process. We just make sure that that's one of the ones that we finalize. Did I drop you guys?
You're here. Barbara and Nicole.
Okay.
If I'm understanding the question, Barbara, yes, that would be if there was a decision by the IRC to approve a third-party audit, that would mean an approval expenditure of that cost that would need to go through then the IRC process for approval.
In terms of who would conduct the audit and what the process would be to engage that potential auditor, I would have to look into that and see. I don't know the counties, if the county has a contract that we could potentially use, if we would be looking at our county auditor and controller. There's a lot of questions that I have, but if this is something the commission would like to move forward with, certainly staff would need to do some research and come back with additional information.
Commissioner Dostal.
I just wanted to say I do like the idea of a subcommittee. I think that's a great idea. I think as far as an external auditor, I think we'd want to think hard about that because the county does have their internal controls. And we just, of course, we want, the budget to be used wisely, and that's what we're here for, to make those approvals. But I think bringing in another auditor, we have a lot of substantive work to do in terms of the actual redistricting. So I just don't want to get, kind of sidelined on things like spending money on auditors, which aren't, that's not cheap. I imagine what you're thinking is CPAs. So that's, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you for that. Let me just ask Commissioner Pons, because I want to recall one part of what he was saying. Was your focus more on building transparency and confidence in the public that we're spending wisely, or that this was so complex and such an unusual event, as Ms. Temple said, that we would really need the kind of outside detailed audit that Commissioner Dostal was just describing? Which way were you thinking on that?
So I didn't have a problem with the internal protocols and the process for developing a budget and executing that budget. My recommendation is just to make sure that budget and the proposals, when it's gonna be asked about the expenditure of funds, that we can actually tell the public. So this is all about confidence of the public in our work. And I'm not trying to make work, I'm just trying to get ahead of the question because it's gonna come up. And so we're doing great work for the community and everybody knows that. But the issue of spending money is always that fly in the ointment. And that can just can create some inconsistencies and questioning about our motives. And I think our motives are pure. I think they are legitimate. But the moment a question is asked about the expenditure of funds and that it wasn't an external audit, somebody's gonna go, why not? What are you hiding? So this goes to the issue of credibility and confidence to the public. not to ourselves, because again, I think our integrity is intact. And I like what was said by Commissioner Dostal. You're right. We don't want to create other avenues. It's going to take up our time. But I do think that this is one issue that deserves our time and deserves the resources to make sure we get ahead of this potential issue.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Serban.
So if the subcommittee meets, has public meetings or reports to the full commission in a public meeting on its proceedings and outlines the considerations that were discussed in arriving at the budget committee's approval of expenses, wouldn't that be sufficient to address those concerns?
In a word, no, because that's an internal process and without an external oversight. And so, yes, it would be okay for us, but to the external audience, it might not be. But I don't want to beat it to death. And if it comes up for review, recommendation and approval by the commission, and if it's voted down, I'm okay with that. I just bring it up because I think it could potentially be an issue. And I'm just trying to get the issues out of the way.
And we certainly won't be taking a vote as such on that today. I do want to recognize Commissioner Larson because he hasn't contributed yet. And I am watching the clock, and I know we've got a few other things to do. So after Commissioner Larson, I'll ask for one more round of, I hope, very short comments, and then we'll try to wrap up this agenda item. Commissioner Larson.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess I have two quick comments. I think this organization, like most, needs a treasurer. And I think a subcommittee who is effectively the treasurer watching the expenditures would be good because it will help other subcommittees in their expenditures. And secondly, I know nothing about what the county's audit processes are or how open they are to the public, but certainly all the expenditures the county makes must be audited by someone. We ought to be able to piggyback on something with sufficient transparency that it would be credible.
Thank you for that. Let me ask if there are any more last questions or comments. Commissioner Kugliak, I can't see you right now, but I assume you'll weigh in if you had something.
I'm having trouble with my video, so I might just like completely hang up and retry again. I can see everybody, but no one can see me.
Understood. But you didn't have anything you wanted to offer just now?
No, I don't think that the second question got answered, though, which is that we're not going to make any decisions on any of this now. It's all not even at today's agenda item. It's sometime in the future we're going to finalize all of this.
Right. I thank you very much for that, because that tees up a good way to close the conversation for now. If I understood the nature of the comments right, let me offer two ideas for going forward. First, I think, as some of you were already hinting, we are going to need to have a discussion about subcommittees. And I think that will be an appropriate agenda item for our next meeting, but we can certainly discuss that in a little more detail as our under agenda item 10 today, when we get to future agenda items. In the meantime, second request, I would ask Barbara, Nicole, and the staff team just to think through some of this, maybe how other county commissions have worked. Have they had a subcommittee fulfilling that role, or have individual subcommittees been, in effect, looking at it themselves? And each one has their own responsibility, keeping in mind they're all part of a committee anyway. I think the analogy several commissioners have made to a treasurer function is a good one to think about in that line. I'd also ask all of you to keep in mind the dynamic that attaches to an independent commission spending public funds or directing the expenditure of public funds by the county. How independent that is and what that relates to some of the questions on audit, I think becomes a little complex, but to get to Commissioner Ponce's point, and I think several of the rest of you, that transparency and that clarity that we're being good stewards of funds and being transparent about it and being responsive about it, I think could be very helpful. So I'll ask the staff to think about that a little bit ahead of our next discussion.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
Good. Closing thoughts, Commissioner Serban?
So if staff is going to look at practices from other commissions, I would also ask if they could see what sort of budgets those commissions are working with as well.
Excellent. Commissioner Hanson, please.
I have been sitting here listening to all this, and the thing that worries me the most is that we're spending what to me is really a large amount of money in a very short period of time. And all of the billing is going to be done after the effect. So by the time we even get the bill, things may be off rails. We may be overspending. I don't know how to explain this but we need to watch it really carefully. For instance, if we don't get a bill until the end of January for money that was spent by the legal team in January, and then we don't meet again until the middle of January or the February, and then it's March, and the spending is going on and on as we speak, I think that's something to be considered, and somebody needs to be taking a close eye.
Thank you for that. Worth bearing in mind. I'm sure there are other comments and points we can make on all this, and I think that's a very valid one for future discussion, but I am, again, conscious of the agenda. So with that in mind, and with the understanding that we'll come back to this briefly when we get to agenda item 10 on future agenda, we will move on. Very good. Thank you very much for that discussion. The next item on the agenda is item 6, competitive procurement of redistricting contracted services. Let me turn it over for now to Ms. Jimenez. And again, we'll go through the same sequence. I'll ask for clarifying questions, and again, try to stay clear of discussion for the short term. Then we'll see if there's any public comment, and then we'll get to that discussion. So please go ahead, Ms. Jimenez.
Thank you, Chairman. So today we'd like to present information on one of the key recommended responsibilities of the Independent Redistricting Commission. As you're aware, this redistricting effort is a public process that occurs every decade following the federal census. As such, the Independent Redistricting Commission's efforts need a unique set of tools, knowledge, and expertise specific to redistricting, and much of that being outside of our county IRC staff. So in order to be able to support your work, staff are recommending certain specialized services be retained by the county under contract with various vendors and to be funded by the appropriations established by our Board of Supervisors. To meet the IRC deadline under state law and to ensure maximum time for public participation in the redistricting process, there's an immediate need to issue 2 competitive procurements for contractors. These contractors would provide consultation services in the area of demographer and mapping services, mapping software services, and the second one would be public outreach and engagement services. Now, the contractor for the demographer and mapping services, again, is needed to be able to provide the demographic analysis, mapping software, mapping services to the IRC and the public for the process of redrawing the supervisory districts. The contract for the public outreach and engagement services is needed to coordinate that public outreach for the process. This contractor would advise the IRC on broad and diverse public outreach to maximize public engagement in county redistricting. And I just want to highlight that they would be advising, but the key piece there is receiving the information and the guidance and the direction from the IRC regarding public outreach and engagement services and our public, of course. One of the notes on here is that the contractor shall also retain the services of no fewer than 2 subcontractors to support the goals and objectives of the statement of work. So at a minimum, 2 additional subcontractors, with the hopes that those subcontractors would include local community-based organizations and service providers who already have that connection to community. They're providing broad and diverse public outreach and engagement services to the target population. They are trusted members of the community who have a close understanding of the community that are being served and the needs, the diverse needs across our entire county. The county does use a standardized request for proposal process to ensure the impartial and objective selection of contracts that would perform these services, and to also ensure that there's a full, open, and fair competitive process. Again, the county's IRC staff and Department of Purchasing and Contracts would provide support for the competitive procurement process. So I want to turn this over now to Richard Mccarville, and he is the Chief of Procurement Services for the County of San Diego Department of Purchasing and Contract. He's going to provide you with an overview of the contracting, the county's current process for competitive procurements. He is not part of the IRC staff. He is not in any sort of my chain of command or in my agency. This is a completely separate department, and this is what they do full time. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and introduce Rich.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As Barbara said, my name's Rich Mccarville. I'm one of the chiefs over at Purchasing and Contracting. I'm just going to run through a presentation today, give you an overview of the RFP process itself. Next slide. Okay, so general goals of the RFP process. We're going to go out and solicit for proposals from qualified offerers. Then we're going to have a team, a source selection team that's going to conduct an impartial and comprehensive evaluation of the proposals that we receive in response to the solicitation. And then ultimately, we're going to negotiate and award a county contract with obviously the successful contractors on the procurements. Next slide. So the RFP itself, we will post it publicly. We've got a system called Binet where we post our solicitations. It's going to contain generally a statement of work, which is a description of what it is we're looking to achieve as part of the contract. We'll ask questions of contractors about their relevant experience and pricing and qualifications and how their technical approach, how they intend to meet the requirements of the statement of work and things such as that. And there's an opportunity when the solicitation is posted publicly for questions and answers from potential offerers. We provide the answers to questions back on Binet so everyone gets even information to all parties who are interested in proposing. Next slide. Okay, so the evaluation process itself. So a source selection committee is assigned to perform an impartial, objective, and comprehensive evaluation of each proposal. What that includes is a balanced appraisal using knowledge and expertise of the committee. There would be evaluation factors that are published with the RFP on Binet and an evaluation tool that members of the committee or voting members would score to. The committee would identify the strengths and weaknesses of the various proposals that we may receive. And ultimately, there'll be a determination of the most advantageous proposal, which is price and other factors, known as best value. In that process, we can seek clarifications on items from some of the proposers that have submitted proposals. We can conduct discussions with them if needed. We can do best and final offers, negotiations. We have those tools and processes within the procedures to be able to ultimately obtain the best value for the contract. And at the end of the day, that would support the making of an award recommendation to award a contract. Next slide. So the SSC committee is made up of voting members and technical members. So the role of the voting members are to obviously fully participate in the consensus evaluation of proposals, including reading the proposals, evaluating them in accordance with the established procedures and criteria that we put out with the RFP, developing supporting documentation as required and requested, and ultimately maintaining the ethics, integrity, and confidentiality throughout the process. Next slide. Then the other members of the team are the roles of technical advisors. So they don't score or rank the proposals. That's something that the voting members do. But they do support the voting members as required and requested. So they can advise, provide their technical expertise and advise on programmatic or technical issues, can perform an analysis if needed, check references, financials, check records, so on and so forth. But again, as part of the committee, anyone who has a role on this committee is required to maintain the ethics, integrity, and confidentiality throughout the process. Next slide. So general overview of the SSC procedure, and this is what members would need to do. They would need to obviously read the RFP that we post out publicly, which includes any addenda, any changes that we would make to that RFP in the process that it's publicly available, to make sure that you have all the up-to-date information. Obviously read proposals that are submitted in response to the RFP, identify strengths and weaknesses of the relevant proposals. There would be a consensus score and scoring of proposals in accordance with the criteria that we define. There's a source selection committee report that is developed, which effectively objectively articulates the reasoning for the award recommendation based on the evaluation criteria that was defined. And upon SSC concurrence, a notice of award would be posted publicly, again to BINET, which would inform the offerers either that they've been successful or unsuccessful in being awarded a contract. And then after that process, we would work to negotiate and finalize and ultimately award a contract. Next slide, please. Okay, so the evaluation process itself, it's a consensus evaluation amongst the voting members on the committee. Everyone effectively goes away and evaluates each proposal independently, again, using the criteria and standards that are defined in the RFP itself. They would provide relevant and detailed comments to support the scoring. We would get together as a group, and as a consensus, we would discuss the scores for the relevant sections of the evaluation, and ultimately the overall score for the offerers that propose. And a SSC report would be developed with summaries and recommendations of the proposal in the context to the evaluation criteria that we set. Obviously, that report would have an explanation as to why the recommendation is best value to the county, if you will. And ultimately, after the procurement process is completed and the contract awarded, that SSC report would be a public document. So it's, that's the objective justification to support the award of a contract. Individual preparation for consensus discussions. Obviously, it's important that the individuals review the proposals and the RFP to make sure you got the up-to-date information and you've thoroughly reviewed the proposals, ready to have those discussions when we get into the SSC meetings. Make notes, potentially on the evaluation tool that we provide to you. So you're ready to be able to compare and contrast in the meeting, the views of the various voting members. And obviously continue to identify strengths, weaknesses, any clarifications that might be needed for proposals to ultimately get to a high quality contract, and any other applicable items that may need to be discussed. Next slide. So with our RFP process, the procurement may be protested by disappointed offerers in accordance with our Board of Supervisors Policy A97. Possible reasons for protest to be upheld include failure to follow the procedures or misconduct or impropriety. That's why we have a structured process. That's why we require everyone who's part of the source selection team to follow the process to avoid any potential issues with protests, and evaluate obviously the proposals in accordance with the evaluation criteria that we define, and very important to maintain the ethics and confidentiality through that process. Next slide. Okay, so some of the kind of legislative and legal aspects that we have to cover off on a source selection committee. One of these things is conflicts of interest. So the California Political Reform Act states that a consultant, an employee of the county, or a private individual may be deemed a public official if performing an action such as advising the county on a course of action to take. In such cases, the individual is subject to the Political Reform Act. So you as a member of the SSC are considered to be a public official for the purpose of this act. Furthermore, Section 87100 of the Political Reform Act suggests that no public official at any level or state or local government shall make, participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his or her official position to influence a governmental decision in which he or she knows or has a reason to know he or she has a financial interest. Next slide. Okay, a public official has a financial interest in a decision if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a material financial effect distinguishable from its effect on the public generally, on the official, a member of his or her immediate family, or any of the following. A business entity in which the public official has a direct or indirect investment worth $2,000 or more. B, any real property in which the public official has a direct or indirect interest worth $2,000 or more. So for the purposes of this section, an indirect investment or interest means any investment or interest owned by the spouse or dependent child of a public official, by an agent on behalf of a public official, or by a business entity or trust in which the official's agent, spouse, and dependent children own directly, indirectly, or beneficially at 10% interest or greater. Next slide. C, any source of income except for gifts or loans by a commercial lending institution made in the regular course of business on terms available to the public without regard to official status, aggregating $500 or more in the value provided or promised to, received by the public official within 12 months prior to the time when the decision is made. D, any business entity in which the public official is a director, officer, partner, trustee, employee, or holds any position of management. E, any donor of any intermediary or agent for a donor of gifts or gifts aggregated. The gift threshold established by the California Fair Political Practice Commission is $500 through December 2020, or more provided to, received by, or promised to the public official within 12 months prior to the time when the decision is made. Next slide. Additionally, Government Code 1090 states that members of the legislature, state, county district, judicial district, or city officers or employees shall not be financially interested in any contract made by them in their official capacity or by any body or board which they are members, nor shall state, county, district, judicial district, and city officers or employees be purchasers at any sale or vendors at any purchase made by them in their official capacity. So the California courts have expanded this section to apply to consultants and contractors hired by the county and who participate in the contracting process, as well as to include members of the advisory bodies. So therefore, no participation in the SSC if you have a financial interest as described. And offerors may not be awarded a contract if their work helped create a solicitation or requirements for a solicitation. Next slide. Furthermore, County Administrative Code Section 67 states that the county shall not contract with A, persons employed by the county or of public agencies for which the Board of Supervisors is the governing body. B, profit-making firms or businesses in which employees described in subsection A serve as officers, principals, partners, or major shareholders. C, persons who within the immediate preceding 12 months came within the provision of subsection A and who were employed in positions of substantial responsibility in the area of service to be performed by the contract, or participated in any way in developing the contract or its service specifications. And D, a profit-making firm or business in which the former employees described in subsection C served as officers, principals, partners, or major shareholders. Next slide. So here's some links to the relevant laws that I just kind of talked through. And I just want to reiterate that this SSC brief provides a summary of some of the applicable rules and laws regarding the conduct of SSC members. It is, however, not legal advice. And if a member believes that they may have a conflict of interest or the legal reason why they cannot serve, they should promptly notify the contracting officer, which would be one of my purchasing staff who's going to manage the procurement if you are part of the committee, and as necessary, seek legal advice from your own attorneys. Next slide. Confidentiality. So this is another important component of the procurement process. The county has the right to withhold information regarding the procurement until after award, including the number of proposals received, names of offerers, competitive technical or pricing information, county evaluation or negotiation concerns or strategies. So SSC participants are precluded from releasing any information concerning evaluations to anyone who is not participating in the evaluation, except as specifically allowed for in the process. The process cannot provide an offerer any unfair advantage. Receiving unequal information can lead to such an advantage. And the offerer knowing who they are competing against, that they are the only offerer or the county favors their proposal, potentially weakens the county's position for negotiations. The voting members of the SSC and technical advisors and specified county staff may discuss information related to this process within the SSC only, within the group of the assigned committee only, and no one else without approval from DPC, but that's Department of Purchasing and Contracting. So members of the committees must not share SSC details with co-workers, spouses, neighbors, in-laws, workout buddies, basically anyone that's not on the committee, because you never know who you're talking to, and you don't know how that information is going to, find its way to potentially cause one of the issues that I've described. So all SSC members must take reasonable precautions to protect physical and/or electronic documents related to that evaluation process. Okay, so that's my presentation for the day. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy.
Going to do is first of all, I just wanted to note that was a lot of detail, but very important as we share all the different potential conflicts of interest for you all to consider. And so what I'd like to do, if the chair is agreeable, is have Liberty Donnelly, a co-manager, talk about the staff recommendation of this particular, these RFPs, if that's agreeable, Chairman Boehm, and then go from there with any questions.
I think that's okay, but because there was so much there, let me just ask if there are any and nothing against you, Ms. Donnelly, but are there any specific questions that commissioners want to ask right now? Commissioner Russ.
So it's my understanding that the Source Selection Committee is the committee that evaluates and awards any RFP, and not the commission as a committee of the whole. And am I correct, Richard? And further, we cannot discuss this with any other commission members, just the three members of the SSC.
Yeah. Correct. And I think Liberty's going to talk about the roles on the committee, but yes, information about the specific procurements. So right now there's two RFPs that have been identified. Each of those RFPs will have separate committees, and the conversations are limited to only members on each individual committee.
So we were just talking about the budget. And so the SSC for each RFP, then they actually are going to commit part of the budget without the rest of the commission approval. Now, I assumed too, the rest of the commission will finally see how much of a budget impact that RFP would have.
Yeah, so information about the procurement becomes public at the point of contract award.
Okay, other technical questions for now, and I want to be very careful not to anticipate questions from Ms. Donnelly, but Commissioner Brown? Mute. Commissioner Brown, I think you're muted.
I was just wondering how long it generally takes, and it probably varies depending on what kind of contract you're doing, but between the request for proposal and the actual awarding of the contract, is it a really lengthy process where, you know, maybe 2 or 3 months? We're limited to a year here to get everything done, and there's a process to that where we need the items quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a comprehensive process. I think a timeline has been communicated, or an anticipated timeline. I want to say two months or so. I mean, that's an expedited timeline. I mean, how long an RFP takes varies depending on a lot of factors, right? Proposals you get, complexities, various factors. So it is an aggressive timeline.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that.
But that's, yeah, the timeline has been put out there, and you know, the key to getting these things done efficiently is if you're on the committee, it's being available, it's being, you know, prepared. They're the factors that are going to really dictate the timeline.
I'll ask
a question with that. And if you end up with the request for proposals and there's only one proposal that comes back, how do you handle that?
So we can award a contract that receives one proposal response on RFP. There's some diligence we typically do about ensuring that the price is fair and reasonable. But we have a procedure to be able to deal with that. Okay. Obviously, our goal and the reason why we post it publicly is to, you know, to get maximum competition.
And one last quick question. Can we get a copy of that presentation you just did?
Sure thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, this is Andrew. I will share that with all the commissioners as well as post it online for members of the public.
I'll call on Commissioner Serban, then Commissioner Hanson, and then Ms. Donnelly, and Vice Chair Diaz, and then Ms. Donnelly. So Commissioner Serban.
So at this point, can we say whether any of us are disqualified based on a conflict of interest, or do we not know enough about the RFPs to be able to determine that?
I mean, if you may anticipate that you would have a conflict of interest, right? If it's reasonably likely that someone that you have a financial interest with is going to potentially respond to this, that might be something to consider. You know, at the very least, if you put your name forward or don't withdraw yourself from consideration, then that would be something that would be determined based on the facts, right?
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is, so will we only know whether we're conflicted out once we receive responses? Or, like, I guess, can we recuse ourselves from considering a response, but still remain on the
on the
SSC?
So the process is when the committee's formed, everyone's going to be asked to sign a conflict of interest and confidentiality certification, and that document talks about known conflicts and also perceived conflicts. So what would happen is if you weren't sure and it was perceived, you would disclose that position to us, and, you know, DPC we'd make a decision of whether we felt that, you know, the perceived conflict was a problem or not. And, you know, depending on the facts, you may or may not be able to serve on the committee.
Okay. And just one quick follow-up. I see that that it looks like we'll have 2 weeks of posting for the RFP before the RFP due date. Is that a typical amount of time? Is that sufficient time to receive enough competitive responses?
I mean, and the posting time is open for discussion. Generally speaking, my guideline is it depends how much time you think they're going to need to answer the questions that we ask of them, right? We post an evaluation criteria and we post what we call submittal requirements, which is basically tell us important information that's going to help us form our decision. So really, to me, the timeline is dependent upon how much information we're asking for. My opinion, I don't think we're asking for a tremendous amount at this point, and we've obviously got a timeline that we need to fit to. So I would say that it would be a reasonable time period. But equally, offers have the opportunity to communicate with us in the process. They can submit written questions to the contracting officer. So normally what happens is if the industry doesn't feel it's enough time, they would ask for extensions and we would consider that accordingly.
So Commissioner Hanson, then Vice Chair Diaz. Commissioner Larson, if you don't mind, and Commissioner Brown, I'll then turn it over to Ms. Donnelly because I think we'll need her contribution too as we roll ahead, if that's okay. So Commissioner Hanson, then Vice Chair Diaz.
Well, I have a lot of experience with these RFPs, and it's my understanding if this is going to be posted on the 28th of December, 10 days from now, the RFP has already been written. Isn't that true? And doesn't the RFP set the parameters for the budget and require the offerer to create a budget within those limits already?
Not necessarily. I mean, not every procurement goes out and defines a budget. So not necessarily. So I think, generally speaking, the market would tell us or give us an idea of the budget. We might have the option to define that budget in the RFP, but that's not been determined at this point.
Thank you for that. Vice Chair Diaz?
Yeah, I had a clarifying question. In some RFP processes, and I know we're getting really in the weeds here and technical, but some require RFIs, a request for information, at the research phase, and to kind of put the feelers out of what is out there, what the industry standard is. But again, in this process, because I'm new to these areas that we're discussing for demography and media outreach, I just wanted to ask if that was typical of what other jurisdictions are doing at the moment, other redistricting commissions. And my second point is, would there be a public comment period typically for the RFP itself, or the drafting of it? So typically, if there's a draft RFP, it could be posted publicly for public comment, then come back to the source selection committee and revised or whatever that process would look like. So I just want some clarification if that's been done in other RFP processes at the county. Thank you.
Yeah, so it has been done in other RFP processes. It's not our standard process, but it has been certainly done in the past. To answer your first question about RFIs, so RFP process doesn't require an RFI stage. We can certainly, do it if that's the direction that we want to go. We do have the opportunity, obviously, for questions and answers from the offerers, though. So that would be an opportunity if they see any issues with our statement of work or they have any clarifying questions, they can ask those questions to the PCO. And then we post all of the answers back publicly to BINET so everyone gets the same information. So that's a kind of a form of an RFI, if you will. So did I answer both your questions there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me request the indulgence again of Commissioners Larson and Brown. Ms. Donnelly, do you want to do your presentation now? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Liberty Donnelly, as Barbara mentioned, and so did Chairman Bain. I'm one of the co-managers for the redistricting process, providing support to you all, basically. Today, I'd like to give an overview of the county's recommendation for the Independent Redistricting Commission's participation in the competitive procurement process. As Rich described during his presentation, the county really requires a standard process of competitive procurement of services to ensure an open and fair process for the selection of contractors. For the type of services needed by the IRC, the county's general competitive procurement process involves the drafting and issuance of a request for proposal to which vendors can respond. The RFPs are posted online for the public using the county's procurement system, BINET. The vendor proposals received by the county are then objectively evaluated by a confidential source selection committee, also known as the SSC, for best value based on established criteria, and a vendor is then recommended by the SSC and retained by the county. The RFP process is confidential to ensure there is no conflict of interest or undue influence on the selection of a contractor and the use of public funds. Nonetheless, redistricting must occur in a public process that is best served by active participation from the IRC itself and the public. Next slide. To balance the confidentiality of the competitive procurement with transparency, given the public nature of redistricting, County IRC staff recommends that the IRC participate and advise the county's confidential RFP process. 3 commissioners would be identified to participate with county staff in each RFP for a total of 6 commissioners participating in the process. For each RFP, the county's recommendation is to have 3 commissioners serve on the SSC. 1 commissioner as the SSC technical advisor to review and comment on the procurement documents, the budget, the request for a budget, the scope of work, all before the RFP is issued. We'd also recommend 2 commissioners serve as SSC voting members to objectively evaluate RFP responses from potential contractors and recommend 1 contractor for the county procurement of services. As Rich explained, standard county competitive procurement requires that the names of the SSC participants remain confidential to limit outside influence on the process. Hence, it is then recommended that the members of the IRC participate in the SSC by a confidential random drawing. All commissioners would be included in the pool of potential SSC participants unless a commissioner notifies county IRC staff that they are not available or choose not to participate in one or both SSCs. Included in today's agenda materials is an overview of each RFP along with a proposed timeline. I'll ask each commissioner to consider your willingness to serve on each RFP and or role along with your availability on the identified dates, as we strongly recommend that commissioners participate in the procurement process. Important to note is that the bulk of the technical advisors' work will occur next week with the deadline prior to the Christmas holiday. And the voting members would need to be available for meetings on January 14th, 19th, and the 20th. As I just mentioned, all commissioners would be included in the pool of potential SSC rules. We ask that individual commissioners notify Barbara by email by 6 o'clock today or at the conclusion of our meeting. If you're not available to participate due to the timeline, just availability, or if you have a preference in participating in a particular RFP or even a role based on the subject matter. We recommend highly that commissioners really only opt out of participation due to scheduling reasons, as you are very qualified to participate in all of the RFPs and the roles. On another note, the reason for the quick turnaround for a response from commissioners tonight is that we would really like to send out draft RFPs that are not final. They still need to be reviewed, edited, feedback, all of that, to the technical advisors this evening to give ample time for review and input. Following the deadline to submit the emails to Barbara, County IRC staff will create 4 pools of commissioners for the selection of the demographer and mapping services technical advisors, 2 demographer and mapping services voting members, the public outreach and engagement technical advisor, and 2 public outreach and engagement voting members. Staff will then randomly draw from the 4 pools to select the commissioners for each role. In the instance there is a pool, which would be very highly unlikely, that does not have the allotted commissioners needed, then the technical advisor and or SSC voting members' roles on one or both RFPs would be delegated to county staff. As a reminder, commissioners cannot discuss their preferences because the process is confidential, and the Brown Act prohibits a majority of commissioners from discussing this outside of a public meeting. We therefore recommend that commissioners only opt out of participating based on scheduling reasons. We will leave that up to the discretion of each commissioner though. As mentioned previously, the names of the selected commissioners will be confidential and commissioners will be notified individually after the drawing. And now I'll turn it back over to Barbara.
Great job, Liberty. I'm going to go ahead and just turn it right over to Chairman Boehm to continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Let me call on Commissioner Larson, then Commissioner Brown, and then see if there are any other quick questions for clarification. Commissioner Serban after that, then Commissioner Russ. So Commissioner Larson.
Okay, well, thanks to staff for providing that information. I was concerned because we don't really have an RFP yet. So I'll be looking forward to seeing it. And that's my comment.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Brown.
Okay, I just had a couple of quick questions. Is there a minimum dollar amount that's required for putting the process into an RFP process, or is there something where if there's small expenses, you can do it some other way?
So there's not a minimum dollar threshold to do an RFP. We have other purchasing authorities and methods to achieve contracts. But I think the recommendation of an RFP is because it's a robust process and we've got good guidelines, and we're very experienced in doing them for best value solicitations.
The other question I had is, will there ultimately be just one proposal selected for doing the entire, oh shoot, what is it that we're doing? the map and the demographics is one RFP, and then there'll be another RFP for the outreach and engagement?
Correct. So 2 steps, separate RFP. Yeah, 2 separate RFPs.
So there's one for each.
Yeah, and
right, but there's only more than one.
I mean, typically we award one contract for each. You know, we can reserve the right to award multiple contracts from an RFP, but typically it's one. And I think there's some discussion about subcontractors, you know, so they would fall under the prime contractor typically. So you may have multiple organizations as part of the contract, but typically one prime contractor who's responsible for compliance.
Okay, so I have right now Commissioner Serban, Commissioner Russ, Commissioner Inman. I think I saw your hand. Anybody after that? Again, we're still in the question phase. We'll have the discussion later. So after Commissioner Inman will come Commissioner Vice Chair Diaz and Commissioner Caterina. So with that, Commissioner Serban.
So speaking of the subcontractors, it was mentioned that within the public outreach RFP, that master would then subcontract at least 2 subcontractors. That the selection of those subcontractors, is that a process that would be left to the master subcontractor, or would that be would the IRC have any input on that? Can we inject ourselves in that process somehow?
So typically that would be something that the offerer proposes, right? They go and figure out their partnerships and they propose it as one complete offer to the SSC. So that would be done within the confines of the SSC committee itself.
I see. And then you mentioned that participation in the SSC is to remain confidential. Is that only until after the RFP is awarded, or is that like in perpetuity?
Yeah, so when a contract is awarded, the pertinent documentation of the RFP itself is disclosable upon public request, right? So that would include, I mean, there's certain things that we retain. So obviously the RFP itself is public, and that always will be. The committee itself, the assigned committee, will be discoverable and public. You know, there's the communications we've had with offers potentially in forms of clarification, all of the documentation related to the proposals, the source selection report, the contract itself. So to answer your question, yes, the committee, the makeup of the committee would be public upon contract award.
Okay. What if a commissioner is selected for both SSCs?
Liberty, I think you.
Yes, the way that we're planning to do is the pool is the way I listed the demographer, technical advisor, then the voting members. So for example, if everyone participates, I would do the random drawing for that first part, and whoever is selected would serve as the technical advisor. We would then remove their name and put to the next pool those 13, and then pick 2 names, because that would be the SSC. So the first SSC formed, technically, what we've planned is for the demographer and the mapping consultant services. And so we did offer, if people have a certain preference to maybe want to just participate in outreach, technical advisor, or outreach voting members, or vice versa, we offer that option based on, you know, having the IRC have a preference. But we do recommend that the commissioners opt in, you know, basically participate in the random drawing of all 4 pools, as you are all qualified to participate.
And so what are the anticipated meeting times? Because you mentioned, I see that they're the 3 in January. Are we thinking something along the lines of the times that we're meeting now? Or I mean, can they be later?
We would work with you on scheduling the time. We do plan to run these simultaneously, but these are tentative proposed timelines. So if there is some issues with scheduling, we're not just gonna continue forward with those dates. We just wanted to kind of give you like a visual of the timeline. And then, you know, we could get a plethora of proposals that could also extend just, you know, reviewing, and that could extend our timeline. And then as Rich mentioned, the questions and answers could, you know, kind of move the timeline. So I think what we gave you is just like a good basis, but we could fall into February for contract award, depending on what may come up.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. So Commissioner Russ.
Yes, how tied are we to the county's protocols for forming these SSCs? Normally, the chairman appoints committees and committee members. I know this is not, I did not see that in our bylaws, but is this not something that perhaps we could do ex post? But given that if we cannot, let's say that we have to stick with the county protocols and have random drawings. For example, in the demographer and mapping software, in the 14, you have 2 people who are economists who have worked worked this way, and with a random drawing, there may not be someone who has that background who may be selected. So it seems to me a bit of a weakness in the procedure.
And let me just briefly mention how I envision the discussion coming after this. After this round of clarifying questions, we'll have public input. The item is listed as an informational item. And in that sense, we're not really ready, or it's appropriate under the Brown Act, to take an action with regard to this. However, it is certainly within the bounds that we could include in our discussion suggestions and thoughts about the timeline and the sequence. And if I think Commissioner Russ, as part of that discussion, we could certainly address some of the points you had in mind. It is a little delicate. I completely agree. And I take your point that there's responsibilities for the commission here, particularly in light of this timeline. And I would remind everyone that we almost certainly will have one, if not two, IRC meetings during that timeline. But I think that's a subject we ought to discuss after we've collected all the information. But I do appreciate you bringing up that question. I just wanted to preview, because this is an informational item, how I envision it going. Rich or Liberty, did you want to comment on that at all?
I think Rich, and jump in, Rich, with me, but the SSC is confidential just due to the potential conflict of interest or undue influence of a vendor knowing who's actually participating in the voting of the selection of the contractor. So we believe, even though you do have economists, that all of you, based on your experience by being on the IRC, are capable, knowledgeable, and you will also have technical advisors. And there's a lot of things that you can request during the SSC that can help you come to a decision. So I think Rich kind of mentioned it a little bit. We can have interviews, we can have presentations. They can, if we don't understand something, they can come back. We can ask them to come back and do that. So there's a lot of things that can happen. But with the SSC, we really want them to be confidential because we do not want vendors reaching out to them, trying to, maybe trying to sway or not sway, but just not having that ability to know who that is. And technically, most of our SSCs for the county, and Rich can chime in, are 100%. I mean, they're pretty much, I don't know of any SSC that has not been, not confidential, but it would be very rare just because of that conflict of interest and undue influence.
Yeah, I don't think though that even if the chair appointed the committee, I mean, that still could, I believe that could still be kept confidential. And in other words, he would choose it in executive session and it would stay confidential until after the RFP is led. So I don't think the confidentiality, I don't see that as being a big constraint.
I'll ask that we'll come back to that when we get to the discussion point, because I think that's something we're talking about with among commissioners. Commissioner Russ, was there anything else that you want to follow up? Good. So next on my list, Commissioner Newman.
Yes, I think in the interest of time, I'll defer. I think what I wanted to talk about is more about what comes next. So I'll defer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Again, I am watching the time and I'm just assuming people have time for this, but if commissioners feel like the discussion is not as efficient or as effective as possible, please chime in and we'll try to re-steer as needed. Vice Chair Diaz and then Commissioner Caterina I have on my list.
I don't know if this might be more appropriate during our discussion, but I was just gonna ask why the urgency of why such a tight timeline. And you mentioned earlier it's because there was a draft RFP already available. So I just trying to figure out if what's governing the timeline. And yet, thank you for, I appreciate the fact that we do have some flexibility, it sounds like, with that, but maybe it's better we could discuss it. I don't know if that's a discussion question or clarification.
Sure. What we were aiming to do is everyone, as you guys are aware, the census is happening. Everyone is going to get the data. So that means there is going to be a variety of people trying to request for proposals for actually not, I mean, there are a lot of demographers, but the best ones are going to be picked the earlier that you have the proposals. And after a certain time period, they will not have the capacity continuing to, submit proposals to all the different cities, school districts, everyone like that. So what we were trying to do is to bring on consultants, but still wait for you to give us guidance on what the, the draft RFP, which we had, utilized from other RFPs. So it wasn't just something that's, it's very familiar to other RFPs. And then you would have more time to meet with the contractors in your open forums to really map out what you want them to do. So for like the outreach services, even with the February deadline, we get the data the next month. We would really like to start planning and kind of dividing your guys' timeline, structuring your meetings based on what you would like these contractors to put together. But of course, if the IRC would like to extend or have questions on the timeline, we're more than welcome to take that feedback and also to extend. But the timeline that we propose is kind of the quickest timeline that we could put together that would be appropriate and have enough vendor participation. Hopefully that answered it.
Vice Chair Diaz, that good? Okay. So Commissioner Caterina and then Commissioner Garcia, do you want to weigh in after that? Good. So
I'm going to defer to discussion if you don't mind. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Garcia?
Now, I have just a very perhaps basic question, and it's this. The composition of the SSC, which has got 2 voting members, is that typical? And I'm wondering why that number if it's not, say, 3 instead of 2. Can you speak to that?
I think we came up with having 3 members to ensure we have a tight timeline and just the availability. When you do, and Rich can chime in, when you have an SSC that gets really large, it actually gets much more difficult to manage because they may, everyone just has different ideas, all good ideas, but the timeline can change. Now, if you recommend that you would like more participation and there is availability, you can definitely instruct the IRC staff to, we can move forward with the recommendation depending on if people all agree to that.
Thank you. I actually think that's worth some discussion. And I also think the timing issue and the sort of the urgency is also worth some more discussion. And perhaps I really appreciate what you said about trying to get in early so that we can have, our pick of the cream of the crop. So perhaps we can, and this is just maybe for discussion, but I'll put it out now. Think about the RFP sooner rather than later, but maybe extend the timeline to give us, more opportunity to do our diligence. And so anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. That's my list on clarifying questions right now. Any other last minute ones before we turn to public comment? I'll ask one just very quickly to make sure I understand. So each SSC would have 3 members, correct? 2 of whom, assuming you have a big enough pool, would be commissioners from the IRC. Okay, very good. Good. With that, then,
county staff would be members too, right?
Correct.
The total is not 3.
That's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
5 is what we're
total?
recommending.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that, all of you. Very good. Then I think the next question is for Andrew as to whether there's any requests for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received 3 requests to speak on this item. Looking at the Zoom meeting, I see one of those 3 is still logged into the meeting. And so I'll turn it over to Janine Arakat. You'll have 3 minutes to address the commission on this item.
Hello, everyone. Janine Arakat from PANA speaking to you all again. First, I want to say thank you to the county staff for your detailed presentation and commissioners for asking the important, robust questions on behalf of the public. We urge you not to make any decisions about moving forward with RFPs for consultants until you've had some training and education to help inform what you want from these positions. It is unclear where the sense of urgency is coming from because you have more than enough time to carry out your duties. Census data isn't being released until close to April 1st of 2021, and you have the additional 2 months. For example, the state CRC has been seated for several months and they have yet to finalize their RFP for the line drawing consultant. They do not anticipate finalizing a selection and contract until late March or early April. The state commissioner and San Diego resident Patricia Sinai is on the subcommittee for outreach, and they're spending a lot of time before hiring until they determine what expertise and qualifications they want for that position. I would encourage you all to invite her to come to speak at one of your meetings and share on what trainings they have received. I personally have presented to the State Commission on Outreach, and Commissioner Sinai is more than willing to speak with you all about the information you would need to inform your decision-making process. Lastly, as a reminder, it is crucial that the selection of important staff is transparent and is done by the full commission. The public needs to see and weigh in on the process. As you all know, the decisions you're about to make are going to affect all of our lives for the next 10 years, and we trust that you will do your best to make sure we're all part of the process. So again, we urge you to hold off, think a little more about what you really want from these positions, who you want to bring in, and who are the experts in the state and in your local county. Again, I thank you all for taking the time to answer these long questions, dedicating your Fridays to these meetings. Thank you all for your public service, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much. And we also had a request from Lori Teal or Omer Khan, if they're joining the Zoom meeting under a different name, if they want to raise their hand in Zoom, we'll be happy to unmute them. Mr. Chair, seeing no action in the participant attendee panel, that concludes public comment on this item.
Very good. All right, before I open up the floor for discussion, I want to remind everyone that this is listed as an information item, and therefore no action can be taken by the commission itself. As I am defining it, at least at the start of this process, it is though within our bounds to have a discussion where we can offer suggestions and comments and further questions to staff that would help shape the process, as some of you have already previewed. So I want that to be as open a conversation as possible, but I'll add one more caveat. I would like us to reach some sort of conclusion today on where we're headed in the next few days and weeks, whether it's the plan as recommended or asking staff for some further thinking about it. I'll clarify it that way. So I'm trying to do this as openly as possible within the bounds, but also continuing the discussion. Now, in terms of order, unless there's serious objection, I'd like to invite Commissioner Inman, then Commissioner Caterina, then Commissioner Garcia, who've already in effect requested to speak or deferred comment, and then move on to others. Is that acceptable? Okay, great. Please keep raising your hands as the request comes. Oh, Commissioner Ponce, I did see you earlier, so I'll add you as fourth, and we'll go with that list. So Commissioner Inman, please.
Yes, thank you. So a couple of things. I am a little concerned about the process, like to echo Commissioner Russ's comments about we need to get the right people associated with the various committees. There is a breadth of expertise across the commissioners, and a more efficient process may be one where commissioners look at their backgrounds and somehow self-identify or something to that effect, just a more efficient than a pure random selection, especially for the technical advisors, where I think subject matter expertise could definitely be an important component in getting us through these aggressive timelines. You don't want to have to learn a field in the process of trying to go through an RFP. So I guess that's a comment. It's a subject for discussion, and I'm not sure exactly how this goes, if then motions come or if this is just purely discussion. But at any rate, that's my thinking about putting people on. The other comment would be, I would like to see more voting members to, I understand, again, getting through this quickly, but 2 people I mean, there are 14 commissioners. It just seems that we need to have more representation from the commission on these very important decisions that we're going to be making. So that's another comment. Again, I don't know how to take action on comments, but at any rate, that's a comment. And going back to the first one, demographer and mapping services. It seems odd to me that that's one RFP. A demographer is a consultant or a person that you would bring in with expertise. A mapping service is, are we looking to get one-stop shops for these things? I couldn't imagine most companies that are providing mapping services would have a demographer deep in expertise on redistricting. So I'm not sure on the thinking on that or exactly why that's all one RFP, or if when we get into the process, these things can be split up and you go hire a demographer to consult on redistricting that, and then you also contract out mapping services. So those are my comments, I suppose. I don't know how to take action on them or if we're just throwing them out there. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And before we move on, I should have clarified. I'm very reluctant to entertain motions for a decision because it's listed as an informational item. What I would like to recommend is that we all keep abreast of each other's comments, and maybe at the end we can wrap it up with both the idea of how we'll discuss it next at our next meeting, because clearly the issue will be there, as well as questions, comments, or let's say requests to staff for how they proceed, and they can work that into the action related to SSC. So I take all your comments. We'll try to make sure to summarize them. But I would request commissioners, as you make your own contributions, please, please, please pick up, reinforce comments you hear from other commissioners so we have a better sense of how the commission is feeling overall. Commissioner Inman, does that make sense as a way forward?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So next, Commissioner Caterina.
Hi. So I agree with Commissioner Inman, and I also agree with Commissioner Garcia's comments earlier about the timing. And I think my biggest concern is that this was presented to us as an informational item, but clearly the information is very time sensitive. And it does cause a little bit of a conflict for us as commissioners in terms of how to take this type of information and not make a decision when clearly a decision is expected. So my closing comment would be, I do think that it's important to get these RFPs moving. I understand, I've worked with these before, and I understand, the length of time needed, but I think we also have to balance that with the ability of the commission to remain independent and with the timing of the eventual data that we will be basing the use of these consultants on, which is again likely to be sometime at the end of March to the middle of April, as I understand it. And that's it for me.
So Commissioner Caterina, just to clarify, you're foreseeing a need, a possible or even likely need for an action for a vote on this at some point.
I think it is written in a way that requires an action, but because it is an informational item, I don't think we are required to take an action, and I don't believe that at this point we should take an action.
Okay, very good. So just to preview, what I have right now is Commissioner Garcia, Commissioner Pons, Commissioner Russ, Commissioner Hanson, Commissioner Serban. That's my list at the moment. So going right ahead, Commissioner Garcia, please.
Right, so I'd like to actually acknowledge what Commissioner Inman said, and I just think he makes a very important point about identifying one contractor as perhaps not being a really reasonable option. And I'm wondering about the same, I had kind of the same question about the outreach contractor as well, and wondering if, again, we want to group one contractor and allow that contractor to do the subs, or if it might be something that we would want to split those up and be involved in an RFP for this specific outreach to certain impacted communities. And I guess, could someone clarify for me what it is that we're doing here? It's called an informational item, and I'm very confused by that because it feels like a decision is being made or something is going to happen.
Yeah. I take the point, and there's a Brown Act aspect to this, as I understand it, that it would not be appropriate, and perhaps more, for us to take an action on an item listed as an informational item in the agenda. We would have had to notify that earlier. Now, three possible ways to address it. One is we just have this discussion and things just go forward as they are. That's a theoretical possibility. One would be what I was mentioning earlier. We collect these thoughts, summarize them at the end of this discussion, and give them to staff in effect as a tasking for a future agenda item, with the implications that staff has to figure out how to match that against the suggested process. But I think, as we heard from staff, and I will ask them for clarification in a moment, there is some flexibility in this, and they want to do what the commission asks them to do, even if it's in an informal channel. But obviously, they might need some more time to rethink this. The third option, and I appreciate that we are close to some holiday periods, but there's certainly a window for a regular meeting to be scheduled towards the end of next week, possibly even a special meeting if it was the commission's decision that we needed an action item discussion early next week. Now, that's looking ahead a little bit, but I wanted to preview that as a potential option, at least as far as Brown Act requirements go. What that would do to the workload and perhaps the sanity of county staff, I don't know. But we could certainly look at that if the commission's consensus was we need to take an action and we need to do it soon because things are happening. We could certainly look at that as a possibility as soon as next week to keep us close to the timetable that's been provided to us. So to sum up, there's a couple of different ways we can move on this. What I'm hearing up to this point, I would put in the category of things we could give to the staff to think about and maybe come back to us with a different process. But that's just an informal take from me at the moment. I want to see how the rest of the discussion goes. Does that answer that part of the question? And thank you very much for the other comments. I think that's all very useful. Commissioner Pons.
Yes, your comment about next week, the end of next week, Thursday is the 24th and Friday is the 25th. So that kind of cuts things close for me. Let me go back to the issue of the process. And I know that the briefer, he used the word, Richard used the word best value several times. And in my experience, best value applies to most often mature organizations. And that sort of crowds out small businesses and minority-owned businesses. And I don't want to do that. And I know we're going to look at prime and subprimes and subcontractors. And I just want us to consider who's on that list of candidates in that pool. Because I got to tell you, in my experience in government contracting, those that can do the job the fastest and possibly the best are those established contractors. And I got to tell you, that just sort of moves those minority-owned businesses and those small businesses out of the competing process. And I just don't want to cut them out of this, because this is about giving them a shot at something where they live and where their businesses exist. So let's just keep that in mind going forward, because I think that's a fair thing to do.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Russ.
Yeah, one thing in response to Commissioner Inman, there is spatial demography in which they're looking at distance and time and place and things like that. So there are there is that discipline. There are those who integrate those together. The other is Ms. Ericat, her suggestion of bringing in perhaps some of the other redistricting commission folks who have had experience in this. I think that's a good suggestion. The third thing is that as far as the schedule, the proposed timelines, I just know that if let's say I was chosen as a technical advisor and I don't think that the timeline is realistic, I will dictate what I think is a realistic timeline. So I think that's, you know, the timeline I think is, and the staff has, they've indicated, sure, they put this out as a straw man. We'll decide the timeline. We do have, we have a year, but this year will pass quickly. And as Ms. Ericat mentioned, the census data is not going to be out for another 3 or 4 months. But also, I do take staff's position too. We do want to get the good folks. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that. So right now I have Commissioner Hanson, then Commissioner Serban. Anybody else want to be added to the list? Okay, Vice Chair Diaz. Good. So Commissioner Hanson.
I want to go back to the question about the process, and it seems to me that we are confusing or mixing up 2 very different processes. The first is the creation of the RFP. That's going to determine who can apply, will apply. And then the second one, which I understand has to be confidential, is about actually evaluating them. But if we have no say on what the RFP itself asks for, then we're not going to have any insight into how people are going to respond. I mean, I think, for instance, what Mr. Ponce just talked about eliminating certain kinds of contractors, that has to come from the RFP itself. And if the RFP has already been written by staff, I feel a little blindsided by that. And I don't know, I think maybe that's part of the process. I mean, that we have to distinguish between what we're going to ask for and who is the most qualified. But if we don't have any input on what we're going to ask for, then we're going to have to take what we get.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Serban.
Okay, so the way I understand it is what we've done is we've reviewed and evaluated what's essentially a staff proposal on the RFP process in which we're going to use an SSC. It sounds like from our discussion that we as a commission have different ideas about how this SSC RFP process is going to work. And I agree with Chair Boehm that maybe the way to do this is to set a future agenda item in which we discuss this thing and we take action that way. I'm not sure if are we able to today, are we able to direct county staff to look into the things that we're interested in? Like, for example, there's been talk about, oh, you know, can we modify the composition of the SSC, for example, by adding additional commissioners as voting members?
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask.
We can ask staff to Brown Act. I mean, is that an action would not have been agendized?
I'd like to ask staff at this moment. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, this is Andrew. I'll jump in, and certainly Hillary or Marguerite, feel free to jump in. But we want the commission to get in the habit of motions and taking votes when providing direction to staff, so that it is in the record and that staff is clear on what direction the commission is asking staff to take. The type of discussion that you're having now about providing direction to staff to come back, I think that certainly is appropriate under this agenda item, just to give clarity to staff and the public on what will be coming back to the commission.
Okay. Any other comments from staff or council?
Just to agree with Andrew that, yes, that would be the appropriate course of action is to give direction to staff to as to what clarifications or alternative processes that the commission would like to see at the next meeting, and then have staff bring that back.
Let me just clarify on that. We could give the direction through comments and through review, wrapping up a note in this meeting without a vote. Because it's an informational item, but at the next meeting we could task it out more formally, or are you saying we need to do that today and that a vote would not put us in a problem on voting on an informational item?
Andrew, correct me if you disagree, but I think the idea is that you would make a motion with clear direction to staff as to what you would like to have brought back at the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, you would have a formal action item to decide to move forward with that proposed course of action that you've asked staff to evaluate.
I see.
Correct.
So go ahead.
That would include a vote then, because there would be a motion on the floor, so it would require a vote.
So it's not an action because it's still a motion under an informational item because it's tasking staff. So we have a concrete motion, we have a vote, but because it's only to staff rather than any other kind of action, it's still within bounds for an informational item.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the clarification on that. Vice Chair Diaz, sorry to take the floor from you. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can I just one final quick thing? Just I do strongly agree with Commissioner Pons's earlier comment as far as the best value and its impact. I would hope that there is probably something in that we will learn about if we are as voting members become voting members of the SSC. I'm sure the county has additional contract evaluation requirements that would address those concerns, right? Mr. Mccarville?
Rich,
I'm struggling to find the mute button. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I think you were asking if we had additional kind of standard criteria that would address certain entities.
Right. So the concerns to as far as awarding contracts to minority women-owned businesses.
So we don't have specific programs. We have a local business preference in our standard boilerplate procurements. We have some DVB considerations, and we have considerations for small businesses. But there isn't kind of outside of that specific evaluation criteria, addressing additional areas.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add, in the outreach and engagement, we do have a recommendation for subcontracting. As Commissioner Pons mentioned, a lot of these great agencies do not have that infrastructure. So what the county has done multiple times is asked they can bid as the main proposal or serve as a subcontract for, so that it's a partnership. So then some of those direct costs that they may not be able to afford can be taken up like kind of in a partnership. So they come into an agreement that gives a lot of the smaller agencies experience in contracting. And so we thought that would be really important, especially in the outreach and engagement process. And then also in the valuation criteria, there is a points given, and we can develop points to be higher in those areas. So that's why, even though Commissioner Hansen, I know we did have a draft RFP, we are really open to adding more, taking out, changing points, all of that based on your input. So I think I think what Rich has mentioned is that we have a process and we can do quite a few innovative and creative things. We just, depending on what it is, may have to be confidential in those conversations, just for the undue influence of contractors hearing like our strategy on how to bid. But eventually the proposal would go public and people can provide questions and answers.
At what point would we get to see that RFP and be able to make comments on it?
I think in the current process, we were recommending that a technical advisor help us review the RFP. But if there is some request by the commission for us to come back and see what other ways we can have more IRC participation, I think we can find that information.
That would be important, I think.
Okay, so right now I have Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Inman. Let me just go with that for now. Good. Vice Chair Diaz?
Yes, to Commissioner Hansen's point, I really am also concerned from a process standpoint, because as I also have gone through RFP processes myself in my own profession as a grant writer as well. So I totally understand how important the process itself is, and to make it fair for everyone. So because of this tight timeline, I didn't really understand the urgency for it, but I think there is wiggle room to create a more flexible timeline to give us plenty of time to select first form the committee, right? And decide who the technical advisors are. And then process 2 is that evaluation process, and establishing what is that going to look like. So I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions still. And I think that all of this input today was really, really helpful. I thank you so much for all of your comments. It's just, my concern is the timeline, and I really would like to see more participation of voting members. If we can increase that number to include more members of the commission, because we're 14 voices in the process. Plus, we have all these skill sets. Why not have someone in a technical advisory position, but not non-voting position if they have this expertise? And so I would be curious to see what that process would look like to maintain confidentiality and make sure that we're not violating conflict of interest as well. So, it sounds like I would support something moving forward with giving staff more direction and making this an action item at our next meeting, because I feel like all of us are still, we feel very strongly about our points, and I just don't see us coming to a decision today about what to do. With that, I just want to leave it at that. And so depending on when that next meeting is, I don't know if that conflicts with what this draft RFP that staff keeps talking about will make that more problematic if we postpone and make sure that we take an action at our next meeting. I just really support just having all of our input taken into account, and that staff coming back to us. And if we could just kind of form a couple of points today, basic points of what we really would like to see in that process, that would be very helpful to frame that.
And for what it's worth, before I turn to Commissioner Inman, I've right now got a list, I think, of 4 or 5 points for a motion. But let me refine that a little more, unless somebody else wants to make the motion, which I'd be happy to. But where I think we're headed towards is a motion that would provide staff with direction to prepare an action item for our next meeting to address at least the following factors. But that's what I want to pull together a tiny bit more, assuming that's the direction we're headed. And if staff has any immediate concerns about that, I want to give them a chance to weigh in. But I still have Commissioner Inman on my list, and then I don't have anyone else requesting to speak at the moment. Commissioner Krugliak, is that you? And then Commissioner Chen. Great. So Commissioner Inman.
Well, I guess in the interest of time, I think we need to put together that motion that you just talked about. So I would, prefer just to get as quickly as possible to that motion and move on. I am concerned that staff did ask us to there was a request to respond by 6 today or some such thing. So I assume that that's off the table at this point. And we're not going to be forming any of these committees at this point. There's going to be direction going back, but so I'll yield the floor, if you will. And I would just like to get to that motion so that we can move on.
Very good. My preference is to let Commissioner Kugliak and Commissioner Chen speak and then present at least the points that I think we'll have for a motion. But Commissioner Kugliak, do you want to speak?
I also appreciate the time. So my only comment would be, in addition to the points that you are putting together, that one of the other things that seemed to be a bit of a conclusion before discussion was exactly which RFPs we would put out, specifically for the demographer and the mapping software and for the public outreach. I personally would think that translation services would be extremely high on the list, rather than seeing the need for new languages as they are requested by the community. That it would be great if we had a broad translation team at our disposal that had agreed upon turnaround times for any language that we thought was critical, rather than trying to get that as the need arose. And I don't know if there are other such areas where RFPs sooner rather than later are warranted. So that might be another piece that you could put as you put your agenda item together.
Commissioner Chen.
So just a hybrid suggestion based on some suggestions already made is that to take advantage of the expertise that we have, perhaps we can make the technical advisors appointed by the chairman so we can take advantage of our technical expertise and then leave the other ones as staff have recommended.
Okay, thanks for that. Let me read what I've got and see what people think. And in particular, those last 2 points, I think we haven't really discussed, so we need to, again, for the sake of time, find an elegant way to handle them. But roughly what I have is a tasking to staff to review, detail, and augment based on the impact that such a review would have on the timeline, and maybe provide a revised timeline. That's number one. Number two would be the role of the more details on the role of the technical advisor, including possible contact with the commission. In other words, if it's a confidential, if we can't identify that person, can we at least make sure to have a discussion, maybe in our next meeting, where that technical advisor would be able to hear other commissioners' views and inject that into the process. But I would understand that as an impact on the RFP timeline. Three, what would be the revised timeline for the posting and consideration of the RFPs itself, along with any potential review of the RFP and discussion by the commission. 4, some advice on options on number of commissioners on the SSC and what that would mean for the total SSC for each of the RFPs we're talking about. We're going into more, but I think it's important to capture it this way. 5, to be inelegant about it, the implications for small and minority business and ways to address that in the RFP. Again, I appreciate what Mr. Mccarville was saying along that line, but I'm assuming there's more that's out there, and we could certainly have a specific targeted discussion about it. 6, with regard to the RFPs, some advice and further review of how the RFP can deal with the number and kind of subcontractors. Now that I would speculate could include what Commissioner Inman and others were talking about with regard to the demographer mapping RFP, and whether that's one or two, but also with who decides who the subcontractors might be and how many there might be for the outreach subcontract as currently presented. But it's just some more information on how that would work that would enable us to have a good, robust discussion about it. And then maybe something about translation services. Because Commissioner Kugelak, if I understood you right, you were thinking about that in terms of what's tasked within the RFP and what we use ourselves as part of our outreach function.
It's more of a question of, are there additional functions that, just like mapping services, public outreach, that we would need to procure sooner rather than later through an RFP process?
So RFP on translation services to go above and beyond the existing translation resources.
And if there were others that people thought were needed that we hadn't discussed.
Okay. Let me ask the commissioners first. Does that capture the discussion? Commissioner Russ?
Your second point about the technical advisor, now the technical advisor is going to be one of the commissioners. Is that correct? I don't know that I don't know if that was captured in your second point. How did you say that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, it would be regarding the role of the technical advisor and when, how, and whether the technical advisor could take advantage of commission discussion. So put another way, one of us is going to be a technical advisor in each of these current RFPs under the current structure. Would there be benefit for that technical advisor in hearing a little more discussion from commissioners with regard to specific points from the other segments of the request for information or the tasking? It's not a necessity by any means. I mean, there's a way we can roll forward on this without that.
Yeah, that'd have to be
that part of the conversation.
Well, that would have to be an executive session, certainly. It couldn't be in a public forum.
No, but we could. I'm saying that since one of us would be the technical advisor, we could have the public discussion, and the expectation would be whichever commissioner is the unidentified technical advisor, they would adhere to and draw in that conversation.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, but fair point and good to raise. Other comments from commissioners before I turn to staff? Commissioner Serban.
I think you mentioned it. I just wanted I mentioned the adding more commissioners onto the SSC. I imagine that is as voting members as well as technical advisors. So perhaps more than one technical advisor as well, or can we ask staff whether that's a thing to explore?
Do you usually have more than one technical advisor, staff?
Yes. Yes.
So we could certainly look at that, even though they would be a non-voting member. That could be another role for a commissioner to take up.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess generally it's a request of staff to explore the composition of the SSC and how to enlarge participation by the commissioners as both voting members and technical advisors.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that. Commissioner Inman?
Yes. Clarifying question potentially, but so there were 5 members of these committees, as I heard it. Three are commissioners and 2 are county staff, as kind of the structure that was out there. I know that we're going to change that potentially, but that's what I heard. Now, do county staff have a vote, or is that open for discussion? Or I don't know. I guess that's my question.
If I may, the county staff, as part of the SSC, would have a vote. It would not be any of the county staff that currently support the IRC. It would be other county staff that have expertise or knowledge in these areas, and that is, we traditionally use county staff in SSCs.
Just along those lines, I guess as part of the recommendation coming back, I assume you're going to evaluate these things, but is it supposed to be balanced between county staff and commission, 2 and 2 for voting? Or was that just a number that you guys came up with?
No, normally we, the larger the SSC, the more challenging it can be. Normally the SSCs for county procurements are primarily county staff and not necessarily community or other partners. So in this case, it was heavier on the IRC side versus the county staff side.
But the voting members were balanced, right? Because the technical advisor doesn't vote.
Correct.
Okay.
So it was in effect 2 voting members who were commissioners, 2 voting members who were county staff, and 1 non-voting member who is a technical advisor.
I believe there's one more. Am I missing one, Liberty? So there was a total of 5 SSC voting members and additional technical advisors.
Correct.
And the additional voter was a commissioner.
County staff. So
County staff.
3 county staff and 2 IRC commissioners. The 3 county staff, as Barbara mentioned, are not participating in the IRC, but they could be GIS specialists, outreach specialists that perform in the functions or have the expertise or of the services that we would like to procure.
Good. Okay. Commissioner Serban, you started that part of the conversation. Does that address what you were raising?
Does it have to be that the county staff would have a majority vote? Like, can the SSC voting member composition be such that it would be 3 IRC members and 2 county staff, or whatever?
If you would like, as part of the motion, if the direction is for us to come back with that information, we're happy to look into that. I also want to make sure that we engage council in terms of keeping in line the Brown Act, and the numbers of commissioners that participate. So I just, I'm not I'm trying not to answer you, but I want to make sure if we're going to come back, we have the full information to provide you.
Sure.
Yeah. Commissioner Larson.
Yes, I just want to add, we are an independent organization, and I think it should be a majority of IRC members rather than majority of staff.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I asked that.
So we'll make sure to capture that in the instruction. Commissioner Dostal.
Yeah, I would just second that. And the way and again, this is just for staffs to consider bringing back, but what I was thinking is that the way we would hire people is that staff would make a recommendation, and then it would actually be, the votes would be by the commission, as opposed to staff voting on it, like staff. So maybe I have that, that's not the way it's normally done, but that's what I could kind of envision is how the process would work.
Any reaction from staff on that?
If I'm understanding, Commissioner Stahl, you are, it sounds like, if I'm understanding you, we would bring forward possible vendors and then you all would vote, but is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I was thinking is staff, you have the expertise, you tell us what your recommendations are, but the actual vote would be by the commission, which is, I think, kind of the same thing people are getting out of this, the commission having the majority.
So that's like a whole different, if I'm understanding you, it would be a whole different process, which mean the county would be moving forward with, because in order to recommend a vendor, we would need to have some sort of an RFP or an RFI or some kind of a process. We would need to go through that process through our procurement, and then we would make a recommendation. And I think that would require some investigation on our part on what that would look like. I'm not aware of us ever doing anything like that, because in order for us to recommend a particular vendor, we would have to follow that full process that Rich just talked about, ensuring no conflict of interest and all of that. So I guess that's where we would need to figure out and get more on what if I'm understanding what you're recommending here.
Thank you. Yeah, and I may just not understand, what's already your process that's kind of your set process and what can be changed. So
Yeah,
So-
and if I could just ask the commission's indulgence, we really struggled with this one because our processes require that confidentiality. So the reason that this wasn't an action item versus an information item is that the action wasn't being taken, but rather commissioners were opting out in a confidential manner, not in a public manner. So it by no means was trying to be at all not transparent. It was just that there was no action to be taken formally in the public because of the confidentiality nature of participating in the SSC. So that was going to be done, of course, confidential by you opting out. And that was no action being taken in public. So that's why it was an information item. But again, we serve the commission, whatever direction you need us to come back with, we are here and we are available whenever you need us to do that, whether it's next week or whenever that is.
Great. Commissioner Dostal, does that answer it for now?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to unmute. Thank you.
No, and it's a great point. I think there needs to be some further conversation. And Ms. Jimenez, thank you for that, because I don't mean to get too wedded to how an agenda item is described or question any intents. I know we all want to get there. I do think it is coming very clear, just as a tonal issue, that the confidentiality and the need to get this right is overcoming the need to go fast, if I'm hearing my fellow commissioners correctly. Commissioner Brown, did you want to say something?
Maybe. A couple of things. Do we have, somebody had asked for kind of information from other agencies or other commissions that had done redistricting so that we have a clue as to how long things take and so forth. Can we get a timeline from a couple of examples in California on that so that we might know whether we are pressed for time to get this done right away, or if we have a little bit more time? And the fact that the census isn't even going to be ready for 3 months, is another factor that should come into play. That will give us some extra time, I would think. I don't know. I have a tendency to think that we should try to get somebody who knows what they're handling as the technical person. So if that could be staff, and then we be the voters, maybe. Does the staff always have to have a vote in that? I'm just not sure. It sounds like we can change the number of people on each of the committees.
Yeah, I think for right now, we need to task and get that information before going further on that. And again, I'm very conscious that we still have other agenda items for today. So I'd like to get to closure on this as quickly as possible. Commissioner Serpent?
Just to piggyback off what Commissioner Brown was saying with respect to other commissioners, I think we could discuss that as a future agenda item, as far as maybe invite there was public comment that was made as to a state commissioner who's willing to, a San Diego based state commissioner who's willing to share her experiences as to what's going on at the state level currently. There's another San Diego based state former state commissioner we can use as a resource as well. So I do echo the sentiment that we might make the time to hear from those voices and then decide how to proceed.
Okay.
It very well could be that we need to be immediate on things because we don't know what's beyond that. It could be that there's a lot more beyond that, and we should be doing this quickly.
Well, the one urgency point I heard earlier from Ms. Donnelly, I think, was about the longer we take, the more the possible pool, at least of some potential bidders, could shrink. So we just need to keep that in mind. Some commissions, I think, are moving faster than us or others, but I don't know that they're having the kind of participation, this kind of discussion. So I, for one, am grateful for that. On the other hand, I'm, again, very conscious of the time. Do we need to go over those elements I just discussed again, or do commissioners and staff feel like it's clear enough if we make a motion? Yes, Commissioner Garcia?
I'm not sure maybe I missed it, but I believe Commissioner Hanson asked for the ability to see the draft RFP.
Right. I
I'm
had
wondering is that part of the direction that we're going to be?
I had that as part of the instruction for more on how the RFP works,
okay,
and whether the commission and how the commission could see it, perhaps review it and talk about it before it was quote unquote actually issued. Now, again, that certainly slows us down, but beyond that, I don't know that the implications are clear. But thank you for raising.
Right.
Sure.
And I don't know if this is included in there as well, but just to clarify, I agree. I feel the need to sort of get more information and perhaps compare what we have in mind, our timeline with the CRC, the California Redistricting Commission, and to the extent that that's feasible, if we can get Patricia Sy or the current person who is in Encinitas, we can get that information. I think that would go a long way towards helping me feel confident that we're moving in the right, that we're doing the right things. And I don't know if that's part of what we need to.
I prefer this be a united recommendation that includes everything we want to, and I'm sure staff and council will tell us if they have a problem answering it. But the comparison to what other commissions are doing and what timeline they're working on, I think is a completely valid one, and we'll make that very explicit.
Thank you.
Commissioner Larson.
Yes, I just want to say, I think, or it's my sense is we have 2 draft RFPs out there somewhere that the staff has developed. I'd like to see them before our next meeting, if they exist.
And I think that's a question for staff about how quote unquote shareable those are, either before or after technical advisory review. Richard Liberty, are you the right people to ask about that?
I think, as Barbara has mentioned, we described our current kind of county procurement process, really our gold standard of confidentiality. And I think we would just have to take that information, and we can always report back. And if we're allowed to, we will. If we aren't, and there's a reason, we can share that information.
So report back on RFP, we'll put it that way. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Good. So do I have a motion on the floor to ask staff for more information on the various issues we've just raised?
So moved.
Commissioner Garcia, second? Do we have a second? Mr. Hanson, very good. Andrew, shall we call the roll on this?
Thank you. Be happy to. Chair Boehm.
Yeah, aye.
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz.
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia.
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Krugliak.
Aye.
Commissioner Larson.
Aye.
Commissioner Pons.
Aye.
Commissioner Russ.
Aye.
Commissioner Serban.
Aye. Although I would like to ask, does staff have a clear direction as to what's contained in the motion?
On behalf of the staff, yes, we're recording, plus we have separate staff taking notes.
Okay.
Thank you for asking the question. I love to rely on recording for this.
Mr. Chair, that motion passes unanimously with all commissioners being present and voting aye.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. And thank everyone for the robust discussion and concerns. It's clearly the right thing to do. And I'm glad we took the extra time on that. That said, keeping in mind that Commissioner Pons is going to have me for breakfast if we extend this too long into next week. We have a couple more agenda items. I want to make absolutely sure we get to future agenda items and to at least a brief discussion on next meeting. The next 2 items we have an overview of the process to disclose written and oral communications. Before I open it, I want to see if staff needs that to happen today, given that it's so late, or if that's something we could table to our next meeting as far as staff requirements go.
So I'll check in with council. Was actually going to do the presentation on the information item, which was, I believe, a request for more additional information on ex parte communication. So if you would like to defer it to the next meeting, or if there is a sense that that needs to be done today, it was regarding ex parte communication.
And let me just ask council, how long is that presentation?
We can move through it in a matter of minutes. I mean, the length entirely depends on how much the commission wants to discuss it or has questions about it. It's a very quick presentation. We can certainly defer it, as the bylaws do specify what the ex parte procedures were. This is just meant to give some more information and make sure that the commissioners are kind of clear on what the process is for the disclosure of those communications.
Okay, so unless there's objection, I'll move forward with the presentation. Seeing none, please go ahead, Ms. Gibson.
Okay, and Aaron, can you put we've got a few slides and we'll put them up, and that should also help move things along quickly here. Aaron, if you could go to the next slide, we'll just get started. And I will just summarize this at a very high level. The text is on the screen, so if people have questions, please do stop me, and we can talk through it further, but I hope it will be relatively self-explanatory. So we discussed this briefly, I think, at when the bylaws were approved. The bylaws do contain some provisions for commissioners to disclose ex parte communications, and that is to ensure consistency with the commission's mission of transparency, and conducting their business in the public interest. Aaron, if you could move to the next slide. Okay. So per the bylaws, and the bylaws do specify this, IRC has 24 hours to notify staff in writing of any communications once they occur. To the extent an IRC commissioner receives an email or other written communication, they should forward those to the staff. Oral communication should be summarized in writing, just very briefly at a high level, including the name, date, and a brief general description of the subject matter discussed. And I've put an example up there on the screen for you guys to review, but it doesn't need to be a lot, just enough to give other commissioners and the public a sense of the topic of the communication. And then forwarded communications and summaries get sent to the general IRC inbox, and upon receipt of the communication, staff will post the attachment within 24 hours of receipt on the IRC website, and staff will, to the extent oral communication information is received, staff will log that, so that is available on the IRC website as well. This provides a process for things that happen 24 hours in advance. We know that this is, things move fast, and that there often may be a lot of public interest closer to the meeting times. So staff will make every effort possible to post things that are received less than 24 hours in advance of the meeting time. This might not always be possible, so staff is therefore recommending that IRC members disclose verbally communications that may occur in the 24 hours before an IRC meeting, to the extent it's not possible for staff to log and post those communications on the website for the public in advance of the meeting. And I think there were some questions about how this, these policies on ex parte communications and the process for disclosing them interact with some of these other things that we have come up in other contexts, both in the bylaws and in the context of our Brown Act training on social media and how that all works. And so we just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about kind of how those things operate together. Commissioner communications and engagements on social media would be considered ex parte communications. They're happening outside of a publicly noticed meeting. However, it should not be something that's coming up on a regular basis, because the IRC bylaws do generally prohibit substantive communications about the redistricting process on social media. This is for a couple of reasons. And I've just put the text of the bylaws provision on this in the screen, but we don't, you guys have that information already. We don't need to read it verbatim. Aaron, if you could go to the next slide. The bylaw's prohibition on social media is intended to facilitate the general provision of the bylaws that prohibit individual commissioners from taking a public position on behalf of the commission. So we don't have, and social media is a way that those things, you could see it all over the place with government officials. Those things get away from people more quickly. You're having what seems like a casual conversation, yet it's out there in public, and all of a sudden you've taken a public position on behalf of the commission when you were just intending to engage in a casual discussion. So that's what that provision is meant to facilitate. It's also intended to help prevent Brown Act violations, since, again, social media communications can very easily and unintentionally become Brown Act meetings that are occurring improperly outside of a publicly noticed forum, where you've got Commissioner A, there's a post, Commissioner A posts something, Commissioner B weighs in on it, Commissioner C kind of likes that, somebody else comments a smiley face, and all of a sudden you've got a Brown Act problem, when of course that's not what anyone intended. So to kind of just put a bow on that, yes, you are required to disclose as an ex parte communication to the extent those exchanges happen, but they should not be happening frequently because of these other provisions in the bylaws that are relevant here, and the Brown Act concern. This is not in any way intended to prevent commissioners from sharing information intended to facilitate public access. When is a meeting? What's on the agenda for the meeting? And the bylaws, these provisions in the bylaws do contain an express exception for sharing information about the meeting time, place, and agenda. So I think, Erin, I think that's it. I think that's our last slide. That should wrap it up. Does anyone have any questions about any of that?
Okay, let me take Commissioner Inman, Brown, Serban. Good. Now I'll again ask, these are clarifying questions because we also have to ask for public comment, but let's go ahead, Commissioner Inman.
Yes, thank you. So I guess, to lack of a better word, dumb it down for me. I have a conversation with my neighbor. I say I'm on this commission. We're redrawing boundaries for the commissions, for the commissioners. And he says, yeah, those current ones are stupid. You need to move, blah, blah, blah. Do I need to disclose that I talked with this person and they told me some information about how they think the boundaries should be formed?
So Erin, if you could go back to the second slide where we've got the text of the bylaws up there. It's worded as substantive communications, and the commissioners are, in their good judgment, going to have to make a decision as to what is substantive. In that example, just talking to someone about the fact that you are serving on the commission, confirming something that is public information in a very casual and brief way, probably wouldn't be considered substantive. In an abundance of caution and transparency, you may disclose that, hey, my neighbor asked if I was serving on the commission and I confirmed that fact. But a substantive communication is more along the lines of discussing the commission's, business, what action you're going to be taking. Members of the public may give you opinions on that. And that may be what pushes that communication over the edge. In your example is your neighbor telling you, hey, I think the current boundaries are really bad and you guys need to change them. That does make that communication more substantive. So, there's obviously gray area and nuance here. And I would say as these things come up, err on the side of disclosure.
Okay, I don't do anything my neighbors ask me to do anyway, though. So. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Brown.
Just a quick comment. All of these presentations that we're seeing on our screens, can we just from now on get those forwarded to us? And then we can filter out the ones we want to keep and the ones we don't. But to me, it's helpful. It allows me to listen instead of having to sit here and write things out. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for that.
I know it's not my turn. I apologize for interrupting, but I do have 3 small children who I have to feed. Is it acceptable to drop off at 5, even though the meeting isn't over?
It's certainly acceptable. I just want to, I'm hesitating a little bit because we do have the other issues to deal with, and I know kids come first. Let me just divert the discussion for a moment. Is there anything on the other agenda items, Commissioner Kuglak, that you wanted to make sure we addressed?
Well, I'd certainly like to be able to attend all of the future meetings. So if we were going to schedule them, I would like to have made sure that I'm available. But I guess as long as it's not at this time, which is dinner time, I can probably make it work.
Okay, so if we were agreeing to meet in the afternoons, 5 would be the latest you'd want to go.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure everyone else agrees with me, but might not have the good excuse that I have at this point.
Thank you for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you guys very much. It was a wonderful discussion. Have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Good holiday. Commissioner Sherman.
Yes. So I know we're going through this really quickly, and we're short on time, but this topic I think is very important for purposes of engendering public trust and transparency in our process. And I wanted to suggest that maybe we could insert a standing agenda item in our agendas for disclosure of non-agenda ex parte communications. And then also when we do take up agenda items, I would suggest that we allow for an opportunity for commissioners to disclose those ex parte communications that commissioners had with regard to that agenda item if they were unable to make those disclosures in time. And with respect to the question of what constitutes a substantive discussion, I would echo Council's advice to err on the side of liberally construing what constitutes substantive. And for myself, I think of that as any discussion that changes or forms an impression on you as to the conduct of this commission. So any communications that I've had that fits that description, I've disclosed, and I urge my fellow commissioners to do the same.
Thank you for that. And actually, that's the end of my list. So let me just ask, Andrew, do we have any requests for public comment on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do not have any requests to speak on this item.
Very good. Any further discussion? Good. For what it's worth, I like Commissioner Serban's idea that we at least have a standing agenda item in general, and maybe just an informal agreement, and maybe I'll just work into the standard chair comments when we go through each agenda item. Or is there public comment, or do any commissioners have any specific comments they want to disclose, particularly if they were received late? Because of course, if they were received earlier, they should have been posted, or we could draw attention to. But I completely agree with colleagues. The more we can have that input circulated and highlighted, the more public we are, the more input we have, the better our results will be. Any other comments on that agenda item? Very good. Thank you, Ms. Gibson, for that. Appreciate it. We'll move on now to item, I believe it's item 8. Yeah. Status of equipment and email accounts for commissioners. This is informational, but I assume will be a fairly short one. Ms. Jimenez, Ms. Temple?
Yes, it's really quickly. The laptops are here. They just got delivered today. You all, thank you for responding on the email addresses. Again, this was a follow-up to your questions or inquiry at the last meeting. You will be getting a Toshiba Dynabook Tecra Model X40-F. What we'll do in light of time is Nicole will email you all out the information on the email and the setup. And then if we can just coordinate with you all. They're currently located here at Chula Vista. The address is up on the screen, but we will work with you individually if there's other arrangements to be made. We just can't transport them we don't want to transport them all to different locations. We have them here and then we'll go from there. So an email will go out for all of you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for that. Any clarifying questions? I assume not. Andrew, any requests for public comment on this?
There are no requests on this item. Thank you.
Any discussion? Very good. Great. We will move on. Thanks again for that. And thanks for all the action and support on that. It's much appreciated. Moving on to item 9, provide direction to staff on next meeting and scheduling of meeting dates. Keeping in mind where we are on time, let me ask Barbara to make a presentation, and I think we'll see where we are after that.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. And I think in light of the time and knowing how challenging it can be to coordinate the scheduling, we can send out a inquiry on availability of the commissioners looking to have a next regularly scheduled meeting of the IRC on January 14th or 15th. So those 2 dates at 2, 3, or 4 in the afternoon. We could draft a regular meeting schedule for discussion at that next meeting. Just a reminder, with our bylaws, it does indicate holding 2 regularly scheduled meetings per month throughout 2021. One thing to consider is once the outreach and engagement partner, vendor, providers on board, some of those meetings may be connected to that sort of outreach, and the commission can always add additional meetings. Similarly, there was a discussion about evening meetings, so all of that could be added as additional meetings as we move forward. And just a reminder, as of this moment, meetings are expected to still be held virtually until further notification, and additional meetings can always be added. Does that work as a process, sending out the inquiry for the January 14th or 15th? One thing I do want to note is in light of the clerk of the board's support of the Board of Supervisors, we find that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, because of Board of Supervisors meetings are restricted, we sometimes are not sure how long they're going to go, especially on the Tuesday and Wednesday ones. So we ask for consideration in that, just because they're instrumental support to this commission.
Could I ask a question about, since if we don't meet until January 14th or 15th, if it is possible for us to review those RFPs, could you let us know and maybe send them out to us via email before then?
So Chair, the next regular schedule meeting that I'm proposing is the 14th or 15th. I defer to you if you would like a special meeting or a meeting sooner related to the action items that were submitted or requested of staff today.
Do I see any objection to that? No, very good. Commissioner Hanson, I would suggest we'll put this in the category of information flow that Barbara, Andrew, and the staff have been so good about, that they will send us something if it's ready as well in advance of the meeting as possible. And certainly if you or any other commissioner thinks there's a need for an immediate meeting, we can take that under advisement. Just get in touch with staff and me and Vice Chair Diaz, and we'll see what's within the realm of the possible. Does that sound like a good way?
That's great. Thank you very much.
Good. No, thank you for raising it. Appreciate it. Andrew, I should ask, any requests for comment from the public?
We did have one request to speak on this item from Janine Arakat. However, I don't see her logged into the Zoom meeting at this moment. And that was the only request to speak on this item.
Very good. I will take advantage to just note and agree with Ms. Jimenez's comments that the more flexibility we can have on some meetings, especially as we get into the public fora on evening meetings and maybe even meetings at locations, the more we can do outreach, but we can talk about that another time. Any comments from commissioners? Commissioner Garcia.
Yes, I actually took the opportunity to read the document that was compiled by the 2010 CRC with things that they learned. And one of the points that they made was that it was important to do team building on the commission. And so we're talking about agended meetings, public meetings, but I'd like to propose that we consider, especially because we have this very odd way of meeting, which is virtual, that we consider calendaring either, some sort of a team building or just a social event or something, whatever we can do to sort of help us get to know each other.
I completely agree and actually had that on my list for the next agenda item. So I'm glad you raised it now, but that's certainly something we can take into consideration. And I'll ask staff to bear that in mind, not just with regard to regular meeting schedule, but maybe not have a specific calendar date, but for several of the ideas that we discussed, including other kinds of training, including more familiarization with some of the issues council covers, etc. I know you'll do that, but thank you for that. Very good. Okay, any further discussion on this item? Commissioner Serban.
So I'm not certain whether we're talking about hearings specifically, but just in a reference to the statutory requirement under the election code, I wanted to remind us all that these meetings apparently are supposed to take place or are supposed to be scheduled at various times and days of the week to accommodate a variety of work schedules and to reach as large an audience as possible. So that's our statutory requirement.
I think it's a great reminder. There are several other requirements that we're going to have to rely on staff to take an initial crack at. Things like if there's several different components to how long something is under public review, like a map, that the meetings are scheduled in time to accommodate sometimes even competing timelines. I've seen that pop up in some of the history I've been reading. So I think it's a great point and we'll be able to tackle it.
And I think just so everyone's clear, I think you guys right now are talking about your regular meeting schedule. The public hearings that I think Commissioner Serban is talking about are statutorily mandated public hearings that are distinct from just your ongoing meeting schedule. So just so everyone keeps clear what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. So thank you for that, Hillary. So those two things are separate categories of meetings. One is our sort of our business meetings, and then this other the provision under the election code that contemplates public hearings, which is a separate sort of type of meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I would urge all commissioners to consider how the two kinds of meetings relate to each other. And when do we need a regular meeting relative to a formal hearing coming up, that kind of thing. But again, I think we can talk about that later. Further comments, questions, concerns? Very good. So future agenda items, item 10. This is an opportunity for commissioners to bring forward suggestions to staff of any items to be considered for future meetings, and specifically any of the issues that you want to make sure we're discussing at the next meeting. It's certainly appropriate to draw on any suggestions from the public, but I think we've already covered a good number of items that will be out there that we can review again. Andrew, I do want to make sure we don't have any public comment requests on this?
We do not. Thank you.
Very good. So the floor is open. Commissioner Diaz, then Commissioner Serban.
Yes, I believe this was mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure how, as far as our recommendation to staff, but I would really appreciate someone from the State Commission to come speak to us about their process and how they set up their commission, as maybe that could be an informational item. And I think we're all kind of curious as well how other jurisdictions are doing theirs. So if we could get like a guest speaker, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Commissioner Serban?
I agree. I'm not quite sure how to structure it, whether it's a guest speaker or information item or what. I'll leave that to smarter people. I think I would also be open to considering the contributions of commissioners at the municipal level as well, or if we have people who had previously served on other county commissioners or county commissions, or even I don't know, school district recommissioning. Anyone who's done this recommissioning work, I guess, and within any jurisdiction I'd be interested in hearing from.
or even commissioners who have served and are serving. And I am looking at my fellow commissioner from District 1 as I say that, Commissioner Dostal. No, I think it's great. And I think we can look to staff for the best way to do it. We could even solicit some additional inputs on that. I think we already have several inputs. I would say it's best done getting as close to reasonable comparisons as possible. The state budget, for instance, for the state CRC is somewhat higher than ours and is already generating some fun in the media about that. But I think, yeah, the more we can work in and the earlier we can work in, the better. So I assume everyone agrees this would be the topic for our next meeting. With regard to, we're already teeing
Take a
up
look by
a
the
fairly
altar.
extensive meeting.
Okay.
So just be aware that next meeting could run for a bit. I did want to ask, would anyone object to starting at 2 o'clock, given that Commissioner Kuliak mentioned that timeline? And I do think we'll have a long enough agenda that working from 2 on is probably a better way to go.
Working from 2 on.
Agree.
Isn't that what time we started today?
That is?
Yeah, that's time we started.
Can't remember. It's been so
I was
long.
exactly with you, PM or 2 a.m., but yeah, as opposed to 3 or 4 later. I did want to just quickly survey, is there any preference or any outstanding objection to January 14th or 15th? I think that's a Thursday and Friday, Barbara, correct? Yeah. Does
Yes,
anyone have strong feelings one way or the other? Very good. So we'll try to accommodate staff who's got a lot of other demands on their time. And by all means, if we need to take a straw poll as we did before, that's perfectly in order. Any other agenda items to make sure we cover next time? Commissioner Inman.
Somebody had mentioned subcommittees.
Good point. I was going to wait on that because I think one agenda item will be the response to the motion.
Mm-hmm.
And the motion will certainly have some discussion of subcommittee role, but is there objection to adding an agenda item to at least get the conversation started on subcommittees? Very good. So let's include that as an agenda item. With at least, we can tie it into some of the lessons learned and best practices from other commissions, but also revisit it based on some of the discussion today. Commissioner Inman.
So I was just wondering about who I communicate with now at the county. We've got Nicole, we've got Barbara, we've got Liberty. I think I've bugged Andrew with my messages so far. Is there a protocol that you prefer we follow or I follow? I just want to know.
Chairman Bain, would you like me to attempt to respond? So I will be your point of contact for everything what we would consider operational, programmatic support, like the budget and the laptops and all that good stuff. Andrew and Aaron Andrew continues to be the point of contact for anything that would be falling under the parliamentary, any of the postings of the agenda, any of the written comments, communication that comes in. He will share that out with you. Andrew, did I miss anything on that piece or?
No, I think you got it covered. Thank you.
So send emails to Barbara.
Yes.
Yes.
And then Nicole and Liberty and Lizette, they all support us, and I work closely with them, so I'll get it to the right person. I shouldn't have to worry about that.
Okay.
To save staff time, I will ask that if it's a process question, please feel free to CC me and Vice Chair Diaz just to help us continue with our organizing duties. But by no means are you restricted on that. It just saves time and keeps things moving.
I don't have an email for you. Am I missing something?
I think you do now, the county email.
We'll do the county email, yeah.
So that if I send something to that county email, once you get your laptop, you'll get it. Do you get it now?
And
we're going to be getting those laptops to you and instructions on how to set up your county email.
And I'm sorry, because I was speaking informally about that, forgetting where we were in the process. good. Anything else? I did want to raise one process issue because I think it's on some commissioners' minds. Some of the mailings of the hard copy are taking extra time right now. I think everyone's understanding this is probably the most unusual December for mail in the history of the United States. But I do think the more we can get out ahead of time, both hard copy and these presentations, the more time we can spend in discussion and take full advantage of the time we have together. So I'll just ask all that be posted, sent, mailed as possible. And again, I think with the computers coming, that'll help things along.
And Chair Boehm, if I could just jump in, can I see a show of hands who did not get their hard copy packets
Of what?
of the agenda materials?
All the attachments.
Okay. All right, thank you. We tried a different process this time. We will try a third one to get it to you faster.
It's no finger pointing, and my suspicion is it's December.
It's stuck with all those Christmas cards. Yep.
We are.
So I've just been printing it out myself, and I'm not supposed to have to do that? Is that what you're saying?
We have it in our process to mail hard copies of all the materials just so that you don't have to print them at home. But we want to make sure that they get to you timely.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Any closing comments on agenda items, Commissioner Serban?
Perhaps a discussion on the on staff's response to our request for information.
Yep, I have that on the list. Very
And
good.
then also just to informally remind commissioners, AB the 1234 training, as well as the Form 700 disclosure.
Mhm. Good. Yeah. Barbara or Andrew, do you want to say a word about Form 700? Are we doing okay on that?
I haven't checked the list. I don't mean to put Erin on the spot to see if she's got a list, but we will follow up with anybody who has not submitted the Form 700. So I don't want to call anybody out for that might not have done it, but we will individually remind them.
Yes, you will be receiving reminder emails from our staff if you have not yet filed your Form 700. And if you need any assistance with filing electronically, our staff is happy to help you with that as well. So thank you.
Erin's making a list. She's checking. Okay.
Chair Bay, one more thing. When we were talking about input from other commissioners, I'd also maybe invite council to contribute to that discussion as well, since they were intimately involved in the county's last iteration of this process.
I think that would be wonderful, and certainly add that to the list, and we'll look to council and staff to get that structured the right way to deliver the most value in the least amount of time. So fantastic. Thank you, though. It's a good point. All right, very good. That concludes our business for today. Right now, then, I will note that our next meeting will be either January 14th or 15th at 2 p.m. With that, I know we all wish each other, but we'll have the big waves and open mics. A very, very safe and happy holiday season. Please be in touch as we can. Thanks to staff for everything. This was a lot of good work. Please pass our thanks to Rich as well. And congratulations again to all of you. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for the great discussion today. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Holidays, Merry Christmas.
Thank you to the public who attended.
Happy holidays.
Those lights on your necklace are great.